You've heard of the Stanley Hotel, haven't you? That grand old place in Colorado, where the Rockies meet the sky. It's a place that's seen more than its share of ghosts and secrets. Built in the early 1900s, it was once a dream for the wealthy and the eccentric. A place where the rich came to escape the world, and the world, in turn, seemed to follow them home. You've probably heard the name before, but let me tell you, the Stanley Hotel wasn't always a place of luxury. It started as a modest little hotel in the 1870s, built by a man named John B. Stanley. He had big dreams, and even bigger plans for the future of this town. Stanley was a businessman with a bit of a temper, and his hotel was his pride and joy. But he wasn't just building a place to sleep, he was building a legacy, one that would change the town forever. The town was growing, and so was the hotel. By the 1880s, it had transformed into a grand three-story building with gas lamps and a grand lobby. It became the heart of the community, a place where business was done and secrets were shared. But even in its prime, the hotel had its share of drama. There were rumors of feuds between the owners and the local townsfolk, and whispers of strange happenings that would later become legend. And then came the most famous guest of all, a writer named Stephen King, who once said the hotel gave him the most vivid dreams of his life. But even he couldn't have known how deep the history ran. So, the Stanley Hotel was more than just a hotel. It was a place of ambition, conflict, and mystery. And the story doesn't end there, because the past has a way of coming back, and it's never easy to let go. You know how sometimes the first sign of something wrong is just a feeling, like the air has shifted, and the world feels just a little too quiet? That's what happened at the Stanley Hotel the night the lights went out. The staff had just finished their shift, and the hotel was supposed to be empty. But the lights cut out, and the silence was so thick you could hear your own heartbeat. Some said it was just the old building settling, but others knew better. The Stanley Hotel had a history, and history didn't just fade away. It lingered, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. The first real sign wasn't a ghost or a whisper, it was a cold spot. Not just a draft, but a chill that clung to your skin and made your bones ache like you'd been waiting for something all your life. And then, the first real scream. Not from a guest, not from a staff member, but from the building itself. A sound that wasn't quite human, but made you feel like it was meant to be. That night, the Stanley Hotel didn't just lose its lights, it lost its soul. And the story didn't end there. It was only just beginning. You've heard the tales of the Stanley Hotel, but what about the night the lights went out and the guests never returned? It was supposed to be a quiet retreat, but something unnatural stirred in the dark. The caretaker, a man named Mr. Stanley, had been warned about the hotel's past. He told the guests to stay close and not wander the east wing. But some, like the young poet, ignored the warning and ventured deeper. The next morning, the poet was never found. His room was untouched, and no one knew where he had gone. Some said he was taken by the hotel, others that he had simply vanished into the silence. To this day, people say they hear his voice in the east wing, a whisper that fades before it can be understood. And if you're ever lucky enough to stay at the Stanley Hotel, you might just hear it too. I remember the first time I heard about the Stanley Hotel. A friend told me, "It's haunted, but not in the way you think." What did they mean? Was it the ghosts or the madness that lingers in the walls? One guest claimed to see a woman in a 1920s dress walking the halls at midnight. She never responded to calls, and when the lights flickered, she vanished like smoke. What was she doing there? Was she lost or waiting? Another visitor said the elevator never stopped on certain floors. They'd hear faint whispers as the doors opened, only to find no one there. Did the hotel have a secret room? Or was it just a trick of the mind? There's even a tale about a man who stayed there for weeks. He said the hotel was alive, breathing with the echoes of its past. He left with a story, but no one believed him. Was he mad, or did the hotel change him? Some say the hotel doesn't just haunt the living, it haunts the stories. Every tale is a piece of the puzzle, and the mystery? It's still waiting for someone to solve it. We started by combing through old newspapers, yellowed and brittle, like the pages of a forgotten diary. The Stanley Hotel had been the site of so many strange events, it felt like we were unearthing ghosts from a family tree. One article mentioned a woman who claimed to hear her husband's voice in the hotel's grand hall. She was a guest in 1917, and she swore the walls were alive with his laughter, even after he'd been buried in a nearby cemetery. Then there were the letters from guests, some written in frantic script, others in neat, careful handwriting. One man described a cold spot that followed him through the hotel's corridors, like a ghost had taken up residence in his own body. We found a report from the 1950s about a family who vanished after staying in the hotel. Their car was found nearby, but their luggage was still inside, untouched, as if they had never left. The deeper we dug, the more we realized the Stanley Hotel wasn't just haunted, it was a keeper of secrets, a witness to lives that had been cut short, and a place where the past refused to be buried. And that's when we wondered, was the hotel haunted, or was it simply remembering? You know, the real mystery isn't the ghosts or the legends, it's that one tiny detail that's just never been explained. Every story circles around it, but no one can tell you what it is. It's like the hotel itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to ask the right question, but no one ever does. Maybe that's the real curse, being too afraid to look too closely. It's not the stain that's the mystery, it's what it represents. Something that never got explained, something that was left behind, like a whisper in the walls that no one can hear. Maybe that's what the hotel wants us to remember. Not the horror, not the beauty, but the silence. The spaces between the words. The things that are left unsaid. You've heard the name Stanley Hotel, but have you ever wondered what the locals whisper in the quiet hours? They say the hotel's bones still hum with the echoes of the past, and some say the ghosts don't just haunt the halls, they haunt the hearts of those who stay too long. Some say the hotel's curse started with the original owner, a man named Wirt Tufts, who built it on land he believed was cursed. He claimed the spirits of the dead were trying to warn him, but he ignored them. And that, they say, was the first mistake. There's also the theory that the hotel's ghosts are not just of the past, but of the present. Some say the spirits of guests who died there are still trying to find closure, and they're not afraid to drag the living into their unfinished business. Others believe the hotel is just a place where the line between reality and the supernatural is thin. They say it's not the ghosts that are cursed, it's the people who keep coming back, drawn by something they can't explain. So the next time you pass by the Stanley Hotel, ask yourself, what do you think the ghosts are trying to tell you? And more importantly, do you really want to know? You know, some mysteries don't just fade with time, they cling to the walls like a bad memory. The Stanley Hotel's story is still being written, and the last page is still blank. The missing guests, the sealed-off rooms, the whispers in the halls, they're all part of the same puzzle. But the pieces are still scattered, and no one's sure if the mystery is solved or if it's just waiting for someone to find it. Some say the hotel is a place where the past refuses to die. Others say it's just a place where the stories refuse to end. But one thing is certain, this mystery isn't going anywhere. So, as you sit here, with the fire crackling and the silence stretching, I wonder, what do you think? Is the Stanley Hotel haunted, or is it just waiting for someone to listen? As the fire crackles and the clock ticks on, I can't help but wonder, what if the Stanley Hotel's whispers are just the beginning of something much older, much deeper? Have you ever felt like the past is trying to reach through the walls? There's a silence here that isn't empty, it's full of stories waiting to be told, and sometimes the most unsettling ones are the ones that don't have endings. Maybe the real curse isn't the ghosts, but the idea that some places hold on to their secrets longer than we do, and sometimes they're not ready to let go. I'll leave you with this: the Stanley Hotel isn't just a place, it's a memory, a mirror, and a warning. And if you ever find yourself there, be sure to listen closely. Some echoes don't want to be forgotten. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a feeling the next story is waiting just beyond the next turn of the page or the next corridor of the Stanley Hotel. You've heard of the Titanic, but have you ever wondered what happened to the SS Morro Castle? A luxury liner that vanished in the early 1930s, leaving behind whispers of tragedy and a ghostly legend that still lingers in the waters off the Florida coast. This was no ordinary ship. It was a floating palace packed with wealthy travelers, Hollywood stars, and a crew that never saw the end of their voyage. But then, one stormy night, it simply disappeared. The Morro Castle was supposed to be the ultimate escape, a place where the rich could enjoy the Caribbean without a care in the world. But the sea, it seems, had other plans. Stories say that the ship was caught in a violent storm, that its lights went out, and that the crew vanished without a trace. But what really happened out there in the dark is still a mystery. To this day, the Morro Castle is said to haunt the waters, its ghostly lights still visible to those who dare to look. And some say, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of a ship that never made it home. You've heard the name, but let me tell you how it all started. The SS Morro Castle was more than a ship, it was a floating palace, a symbol of luxury and pride for the people of San Juan. Built in 1932, it was the largest and most opulent vessel in Puerto Rico's fleet, designed to carry both passengers and cargo. But it was the passengers who really made it shine. But behind its glamour was a complex web of people, engineers, crew, passengers, and the ever-present presence of the sea, which, for all its beauty, had a way of claiming the unprepared. And then, one night, the sea took it. The Morro Castle wasn't just a ship, it was a dream, a symbol of hope and ambition, and in the end, it was the sea that reminded us all that nature is not to be trifled with. You know how sometimes, on a quiet night, the wind picks up just enough to remind you that the sea is still out there? Well, on the night of September 26th, 1935, the Morro Castle felt that same restless breath, but it was different. Like the ocean had a voice and it was whispering warnings. The crew noticed at first this strange, low hum that didn't match the engines. It was like the ship itself was humming a lullaby, and the crew was trying not to wake the sleeping sea. Then came the lights flickering, sputtering, as if the ship was losing its grip on reality. Some said it was the wind, but others swore the lights were dimming like a soul being pulled under. The radio crackled with static, and the voices on the other end were distorted, like they were coming from a dream that was fading. It was as if the ship was trying to call for help, but the sea wasn't listening. And then, just like that, the Morro Castle vanished. Not with a scream or a crash, but with a silence so deep it made the air itself hold its breath. One night in 1935, the Morro Castle was supposed to be a floating palace of luxury, but instead, it became a floating tomb. The radio crackled with the last words of the captain before the ship vanished into the dark. The last transmission was a desperate plea, a voice trembling as it spoke of fire and smoke, and a ship that seemed to vanish into the Atlantic like it had never been there. What happened on that fateful night remains a mystery, but the Morro Castle's disappearance has left a lingering shadow on the ocean, a whisper in the wind, and a question that no one has yet answered. You've heard the story, but have you ever wondered what really happened to the Morro Castle? Did it sink, or did it vanish for a reason we can't yet understand? I remember the night the Morro Castle slipped away, like a dream that fades before you can grasp it. Some say the wind carried its last sigh, others whisper it was taken by the sea itself. One survivor, a nurse named Margaret Hargreaves, said the ship was like a ghost in the moonlight, too quiet, too still, as if it were holding its breath. Others claim they heard a woman's voice, calling from the dark, sobbing, pleading, as if the ship had a soul that refused to let go. The most chilling account came from a sailor who said the last thing he saw was the ship's figurehead, carved like a face staring back at him, unblinking, as if it knew the end was coming. These stories don't just haunt us, they remind us that some mysteries never fade, and some disappearances are still waiting to be told. The investigators found a strange pattern in the ship's logs. Certain dates kept repeating, like the ship was stuck in a time loop. It was as if the Morro Castle wasn't just sailing through the Atlantic, but through some other, more dangerous kind of sea. They uncovered a list of names, some of the crew, some of the passengers, marked with a single letter, M. No one knew what it meant, but the silence around those names was louder than any explanation. The ship's radio records revealed strange static during the night of the fire. It wasn't just interference, it was like the ocean itself was trying to speak, in a language no one could understand. In the final days, the captain's private journal was found, pages filled with desperate prayers and questions, as if he had known something was coming and couldn't stop it. The last entry was just a single word: forgive me. The most unsettling find was a sealed box in the captain's quarters. Inside were old photographs of the ship, but each one showed the Morro Castle in a different place, some in the Caribbean, some in the Arctic, one even in the moonlight of a desert. The investigation ended with more questions than answers, but the Morro Castle story didn't end there. It just started to whisper again, in the silence between the lines of the logbook. You know, there's one thing that's never been explained. Not the fire, not the sinking, not even the disappearance of the passengers. It's something smaller, something quieter, a detail so insignificant it slipped through the cracks of history. It's the color of the water, or maybe the lack of it. The official reports say it was a calm night, the sea as smooth as glass, but the survivors say otherwise. They say the water was black, thick, like it was holding its breath. No one knows if it was the fire that changed the color of the water, or if the water changed the fire. What we do know is that no one saw the ship go down. No one heard the screams. No one saw the bodies. And that's the thing. The silence. The absence of sound. The ship went down, and the sea swallowed it whole, without a ripple, without a cry, without a trace. So here's the question, dear listener. What if the Morro Castle didn't just sink? What if it was taken? What if the sea itself was waiting for something and it never came? You've heard the names of the lost, but have you ever heard the whispers of the ones who remember? Some say the Morro Castle wasn't just a ship, it was a place where time folded in on itself. In the decades since the Morro Castle vanished, stories have grown like ivy. Some say the ship's ghost still sails through the night, pulling in those who get too close to the truth. Some locals say they've seen the Morro Castle's ghost in their sleep, or heard a bell ring at midnight in the middle of a storm. But they never talk about it. Not really. And then there are the theories. Some say it was a curse, others a curse of the sea. But maybe the real mystery isn't the ship at all, but the people who vanished with it. Even now, decades later, no one knows for sure what happened that night. Was it a fire, a storm, or something far more mysterious? You've heard the stories, but the truth is still wrapped in fog. The ship's log was lost, the crew scattered, and the passengers never seen again. It's like the seas swallowed them whole, leaving only whispers and unanswered questions. Even today, the wreck sits in the Atlantic, a silent tomb. No one has ever recovered the bodies, and no one has ever found the cause. It's like the sea itself is holding its breath. So, what do you think? Was it a tragedy, a mystery, or something more? The sea has its own stories, and it's not done telling them yet. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The Morro Castle's story isn't just about a ship, it's about the lives that sailed with it, the ones who vanished, and the ones who never forgot. And as we close this tale, I can't help but wonder what happens when the ocean finally gives up its secrets. Does the castle find its way home, or does it stay, forever adrift in memory? But before we move on, let's take a moment to remember that every ghost has a story, and every story deserves to be told with care and respect. So, as we turn the page, I'll leave you with this: the sea has many faces. Some are calm, some are cruel, but none are ever truly silent. And now, as the wind shifts, I think we're ready for the next story. Are you ready to sail with me into the next mystery? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place of whispers, a place where time seems to pause just long enough for the wind to carry a child's voice. Once a place of learning and quiet devotion, now it's a ruin, overgrown and forgotten, where the air feels thick with unspoken sorrow. Some say the wind carries the voices of the children who once lived there, trapped between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Others say the priory was a place of dark secrets with a line between faith and fear blurred, and the voices that remain are echoes of what was buried. But no one can agree on what exactly is calling them. That's what makes the Priory of Sion so very, very strange. You know, the Priory of Sion wasn't just a place of prayer and pilgrimage. It was also a refuge for those who had nowhere else to go, poor travelers, exiles, and even those who had been cast out of their own towns. Imagine a cloaked figure stepping through the heavy oak doors, their boots echoing in the silence. The monks who lived there were more than just religious men. They were scholars, keepers of ancient knowledge, and even a few are rumored to have dabbled in alchemy and astrology. It wasn't just about faith, it was about understanding the world in all its mysteries. But there was also a darker side to the priory. Some say it was a place where secrets were buried not just in the earth, but in the minds of those who lived there. And if the whispers are to be believed, those secrets didn't stay buried for long. The priory's reputation grew as travelers and pilgrims came to seek shelter, only to leave with stories of voices in the night, of doors that opened on their own, and of a choir that sang not in the daylight, but in the hollows of the night. And so, the Priory of Sion became more than a place of worship. It became a legend in its own right, a place where history, mystery, and the unknown converge. And now you're listening to the echoes of that legacy. You remember the first time you heard that strange, echoing hum in the chapel? It wasn't quite a sound, more like a vibration in the air, like the world had shifted just a hair. The nuns said it was the wind, but the wind never made that sound. It was low, resonant, like a choir of unseen voices, all singing in unison, but no one could hear them. The sisters began to sleepwalk. They'd wander the cloisters at night, whispering in a language no one could understand, and when they woke, they'd forget what they'd done. The headmistress called it a curse, but I think it was something else entirely, something that had been waiting in the stone for centuries, and now it had found its voice. And then the first girl disappeared, not in the night, but in the morning. No trace, no sound, just the echo of a choir, and a silence that never ended. You know, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that begin with a simple question: what if the silence wasn't silence at all? What if it was a song, just one we couldn't hear? In the summer of 1957, the Priory of Sion had a reputation for being quiet, too quiet. The nuns who lived there were known for their devotions, their prayers, their quietness. But the silence began to shift, and the echoes grew louder. The townspeople claimed they heard the singing from miles away, but when they came to investigate, they found only empty rooms and a single, folded prayer shawl left on a bench in the chapel. No one knew what happened that night. Some said the nuns had left of their own accord. Others whispered that the voices had been taken, that the choir had been silenced for a reason. And still, the silence lingered. The Priory of Sion still stands, but the silence has grown heavier. Some say the choir is still there, just waiting for someone to listen. But if you do, you might never be the same again. I spoke to an elderly woman in New Orleans who claimed she heard the choir during a storm, just before the lights went out. She said it was like 1,000 voices singing in the dark, but no one was home. She described the voices as both sweet and sorrowful, like a hymn from a long ago time. She didn't know the words, but she swore they were singing to her. One man from Texas told me he heard the choir when he was camping near the ruins. He said it wasn't loud, just a whisper, like a child's lullaby, but it made his skin crawl. He said the song stopped when he tried to call out, and the silence that followed was heavier than the night. He didn't say a word about it to anyone, but I could tell it haunted him. Even the local priest said he has heard it once, but he was too afraid to say where. He called it a hymn of the lost, a song for those who never found their way home. And so, the choir continues, a whisper in the dark, a song for the forgotten. You might hear it too, if you listen closely enough. But be warned, some songs have no ending. We started by walking the same paths the monks once did, and it wasn't long before we found the first clue, a weathered wooden cross half buried in the soil, its carvings worn smooth by time. The cross was marked with initials, but they weren't in Latin. They were in a strange, looping script that looked like it had been written by someone who had forgotten how to spell their own name. Further in, we found a stone slab covered in faint, almost invisible markings like a map of something forgotten. The symbols glowed faintly in the dark, like the ghost of a memory trying to surface. One of the researchers claimed to hear a faint, echoing hum when they passed over the slab. It wasn't loud, but it was there, like the walls were whispering to them in a language they didn't understand. We also found a small, rusted bell that had been buried near the chapel. It was still intact, but when we tried to ring it, it made a sound that wasn't quite a bell at all. It was more like a voice, soft and distant. By the end of the first day, we had more questions than answers. But we knew this place had something to tell us, and it wasn't going to give it up easily. You ever notice how some stories just stop? Like the world holds its breath, and then nothing. That's what happened with the Priory of Sion. One day, they were there. The next, they were gone. And no one knows why. The last letter they sent was about a new chant, a hymn they were supposed to sing in the choir, but no one ever heard it. Not the monks, not the townsfolk, not even the investigators who came decades later. The only thing that remained was the hymn, a melody that no one could ever place. Some say it was a warning, others say it was a lullaby for the dead, but no one knows who wrote it, or why it was never sung. And that's the thing, isn't it? The one thing that never gets answered. Not the who, not the how, not the why, just the silence. The silence of a place that was never meant to be forgotten. You've heard the stories, but here in this town, we don't just whisper about the Priory. We no asterisk its name. It's the one place where the shadows are too long and the silence too heavy. Some say the choir never stopped singing. Others claim it was the monks themselves who vanished, leaving only their voices behind. But no one can agree on what they sang. Old Mrs. Whitaker used to tell me about the night she heard them. She said the voices were so clear, they made her feel like she was part of something much bigger, like she was asterisk inside asterisk the song. But then there's the other theory, that the voices were never real, that they were just the sound of the wind or the memory of a place that never truly existed. But that doesn't stop people from believing. And now, as the years pass, the stories fade, but the echoes don't. You can still hear them if you know where to listen, just don't let them find you. You know, sometimes the most haunting thing isn't the ghost, it's the silence. The silence that lingers after the last note of the hollow choir has faded. The silence that says, we're still here, but we won't sing for you. There are no records of who they were, only whispers of a choir that sang at night, voices rising from the crypt like ghosts trying to reach the living. No one ever found them. No bodies. No clues? The last person to search for answers was a young woman with a camera and a heart full of questions. She never returned, and the Priory, it seems, has more to say than it ever did. So now, the Priory just waits for the next curious soul to come, to ask the same questions and to maybe, finally, hear the hollow choir once more. You've heard the stories, felt the chill, but sometimes the silence speaks louder than the scream. What do you think lingers when the last echo fades? The Priory may be quiet now, but the air still hums with something ancient, something waiting. Did you ever wonder if the ghosts are just listening? Before we go on, take a moment to breathe. The stories are heavy, but so is the air here. Are you ready to hear what comes next? Remember, the ghosts don't want to scare you, they want to tell you something. And sometimes, that's the scariest thing of all. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard of the Titanic, but what about the Morro Castle? A grand ocean liner, built for luxury, but it vanished in the Caribbean like a ghost ship, leaving behind more questions than answers. Launched in 1930, it was the largest ship in the world, packed with opulence, but its reputation was darker than its gilded hulls. Rumors whispered of curses and lost souls. Its last voyage was supposed to be a simple run between Havana and Miami, but it vanished in the night with over 1,000 souls aboard and no distress call. No wreckage was ever found, and no survivors came forward. The Morro Castle became a symbol of the unknown, a ghost drifting through the Atlantic, still waiting to be found. So, why do we tell this story? Because sometimes, the most haunting things are the ones that never leave. You know, the Morro Castle wasn't just a ship, it was a floating palace, a party on the sea. Built in 1931, it was the grandest of the Caribbean cruise ships, and it was packed with the wealthiest tourists from New York and Florida. Its owner, a man named Edward R. Marshall, had big plans. He wanted the Morro Castle to be more than a cruise ship. It was supposed to be a floating resort, a place where the rich could escape the city and live like royalty. The Morro Castle's captain, Edward A. Goss, was a man with a past. He'd been through a lot in his career, and some say he carried a lot of secrets in his heart too. And then there was the crew. Over 200 souls, all of them working hard to keep the ship running, to keep the guests entertained, and to keep the illusion of luxury alive. So when the Morro Castle set sail from Miami on September 8, 1935, it was not just a ship leaving port, it was a world, a dream, and a lot of people's lives, all tied together on a single, doomed voyage. You know, sometimes the worst things start with a whisper, that first flicker of something off, a light that shouldn't be there, a sound that doesn't belong. And the Morro Castle, it started with a radio. The crew called it the sinking ship, a term they used with a laugh, like it was just another day on the sea. But you know what they don't tell you. That laugh didn't last long. It was the last thing they said. Then came the calls. Not from the crew, but from people on shore. We heard a woman singing, they said, a voice like a lullaby, but it was crying. Some said they saw lights in the water, others just silence where there should have been noise. And you know what they never explained? Why the radio was still working. Why it kept playing the same song, even after the ship was gone. Some say it was the captain's last broadcast. Others say it was the ghost of the ship itself, trying to call for help. That's when the first real fear crept in. Not of the sea, not of the storm, but of the silence. Because you know what they don't tell you. The ship didn't just vanish. It didn't sink. It disappeared. And something was still aboard. You remember the night the Morro Castle vanished? It was a summer evening, the kind where the ocean whispers secrets to the shore and the sky turns the color of old bruises. The ship was supposed to be heading back to New York, but it never made it. The last radio transmission was a calm, almost sleepy voice, like a lullaby. We are proceeding under normal conditions. But then nothing. The ship just disappeared. No distress call, no wreckage, just silence. Silence that made the whole world hold its breath. They say the Morro Castle never truly left the sea, that it still drifts through the Atlantic, a ghost in the waves, searching for the one person who never made it back. The one person who was never found. To this day, no one knows for sure what happened. But if you listen closely, out there in the dark, you can almost hear the ship's whistle calling out to the shore. And sometimes, you think you see a light faint flickering just beyond the mist. Some survivors say the air turned thick like syrup that night, and the ship groaned as if it were alive. You can almost hear the creak of the wood, the sound of something shifting in the dark. One man swore he saw a woman in a white dress floating through the smoke, her hands outstretched like she was trying to reach someone or something on the shore. Others claim the ship was haunted by its own past, a ghostly echo of the lives it carried and the lives it took. You can feel the weight of those stories pressing down on the present. There's a woman who says she heard the ship's bell ring long after it was supposed to be gone, and that sound still haunts her dreams to this day. The testimonies are scattered, but they all point to the same thing. Something was on that ship that night, something that didn't die with the fire. The investigation began in earnest, with detectives poring over every log, every report, every scrap of paper. They followed the trail of the Morro Castle like a ghost through time, chasing whispers and half-truths. They found records of the ship's final moments, its last radio transmissions, its frantic attempts to steer, the eerie silence that followed. It was as if the sea had swallowed it whole. There were rumors of a ghostly figure seen near the engine room, and a cook who swore he saw a woman in a white dress standing by the railing, just before the ship disappeared. The deeper they dug, the more the story seemed to shift. Some said the ship was cursed, others believed it was a cover-up. But one thing was clear, something had changed the night the Morro Castle vanished. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me about the Morro Castle? It's like the ship just vanished. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace. It's as if it was swallowed by the sea itself like a ghost ship. They found the captain's log, but it ends mid-sentence, like he was cut off mid-thought, or maybe he never made it to the end. You can almost hear him shouting over the waves. There's no real evidence of what happened that night, no survivors, no witnesses, just the silence of the sea. It's like the ocean itself is holding its breath. And the strangest part? The same thing happened to the *SS Norvina* years later, a ship that disappeared under similar circumstances. Like the sea had a grudge against these ships. So, what do you think? Was it a storm, a curse, or something older? Something that doesn't want to be found? You ever heard the tale of the Morro Castle, or do you just hear the whispers of it? It's like a ghost story that's been passed down through the generations, like a family secret. Some say it's not just the ship that vanished, it's the stories too. The more you try to catch it, the more it slips away, like smoke in the morning light. There's a rumor that the crew still haunts the place they vanished. Some say the ship is still out there, waiting for the right moment to return, like a ghost who's not ready to let go. And then there are the locals, the ones who know the real story. They say it wasn't just a ship, it was a whole life, a whole history that was taken from them without a word. So the next time you hear the name Morro Castle, don't just think of a ship. Think of a mystery, a story, and a whole lot of unanswered questions that still linger in the dark. You know, even now, decades later, the Morro Castle still refuses to give up its secrets. Some say it's not just a ship, it's a ghost ship, a phantom that lingers in the Atlantic, waiting for the right moment to return. The Coast Guard searched high and low, but nothing ever surfaced. No bodies, no wreckage, just silence. And that silence? It's louder than any scream. And then there are the whispers, the ones that say the Morro Castle was never lost, it was hidden, sealed away by forces we can't even begin to understand. So, what do you think? Was it an accident, a curse, or something far more terrifying? The truth might still be out there, waiting for the right person to listen. You know, sometimes the most haunting places aren't the ones that scream, but the ones that whisper. The Morro Castle didn't shout its story, it just faded away, like a dream you wake up from and can't quite remember. And maybe that's why we keep coming back to it, because it never truly left. It lingers in the silence between the waves, in the stories we tell, in the spaces between the lines of history. Stay with me, dear listener. The stories are just beginning. Now, let's turn the page. The next tale is waiting. You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a house that was haunted before it was even built? The Bridgewater house isn't just old, it's ancient, like a secret buried in the bones of the earth. This place was once a haven for the wealthy, but now it's more like a tomb. Rumors say it was built on land that belonged to a Native American village, and that the house itself was cursed by the spirit of a wronged woman. No one knows what happened to the original family that lived there. They vanished without a trace, and the house has been abandoned for over a century. But the stories don't stop there. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the house is still waiting for someone to come in and wake up the past. Others say it's just waiting for the right person to come in and listen to the stories it has to tell. And that's why we're here, isn't it? To listen, to wonder, and to remember that even the oldest houses have stories that still need to be told. You see that old brick house there, nestled between the woods and the river? That's where it all started. A place of quiet beauty, but with a past that's anything but peaceful. Built in the early 1800s by a wealthy industrialist named Elias Bridgewater, it was meant to be a family estate. But Elias had a temper, and his wife, Margaret, was the only one who could calm him. But the tensions between Elias and Margaret were always there, simmering beneath the surface. And when their youngest child, a girl named Clara, died under mysterious circumstances, the house turned dark. The family never spoke of what happened that night, but the house, as if it knew, began to change. The windows would open on their own, and the walls seemed to breathe. And so, the Bridgewater house became more than a home. It became a place of secrets, of sorrow, and of something that lingers long after the last person leaves. You see it now, the first crack in the veneer of normalcy, a flicker in the hallway light, just as the clock strikes midnight. It's not the electricity, it's something else, something that doesn't belong. The house itself seems to hold its breath. The air grows heavier, the scent of old wood and dust thicken the lungs. You feel it, the weight of something watching, waiting. You tell yourself it's just the house, just the old wood settling. But the knocks keep coming, 3, then 5, then 7. A pattern, a message, a warning. And then, the first whisper. Not from the wind, not from the walls. It comes from the silence. A voice, low and soft, like a memory trying to reach you. You turn, and there's nothing. Just the house and the quiet. and the feeling that you'd just been given a glimpse of something that was meant to stay buried. You remember the way the wind used to howl through the cracks in the old walls, like it was trying to get in. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. One cold October night, the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Then, just as the last embers of the fire died, the house let out a sound like a child crying in the dark. No one heard the scream that followed. It was too low, too far inside the house. But the next morning, the caretaker found a child's shoe, half buried in the garden, still warm. They never found the child again. The house kept its secret, and the wind still howls through the cracks, as if waiting for the right moment to tell the rest of the story. One of the most chilling accounts came from a woman named Clara, who said she saw a figure in the hallway with no face, just a long, flowing black dress and a faint, pale glow. She said it didn't move, just stood there, watching her. Another witness, a retired teacher named Margaret, said she heard whispers in the attic, like someone was speaking in a language she couldn't understand. She said the words were warm and familiar, like they were meant for her. Some claimed the house made them feel as though they were being watched, even when no one was around. They described a sensation of cold air brushing their neck, or a feeling of weight pressing down on their chest, like the house itself was holding its breath. The most disturbing account, though, came from a man who said he saw a mirror in the hallway, and when he looked into it, his reflection wasn't him. It was a man who looked like him, but older, with a shadowy, elongated face and eyes that seemed to follow him no matter where he moved. The first clue came from a faded newspaper clipping, tucked between the pages of a dusty ledger. It spoke of a missing child, a boy named Ali, who vanished without a trace in 1923. The investigators found the ledger in the attic of the old Bridgewater house, its pages filled with the names of those who had disappeared over the years, like a silent, cursed registry. The deeper they dug, the more the house seemed to resist them. Doors would slam shut on their own, and the walls would echo with whispers they couldn't place. They found a child's shoe, half buried in the garden, its sole worn smooth by time. It was the only physical proof they had of the missing children, and it felt like a cruel joke. The team left with more questions than answers, but they all agreed on one thing. The Bridgewater house wasn't just haunted, it was holding on to something it wasn't ready to let go. You know, there's one thing about the Bridgewater house that's always bugged me. No one can agree on what exactly the door was made of. Some say it was oak, others say it was something else entirely, but no one can say for sure. It's like the house itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to figure it out. But the truth, it's just gone, like it was never there at all. And yet, every time we look, it's just there, like it's waiting for someone to ask the right question. But no one has the courage to ask. So here's the thing, maybe the house isn't haunted. Maybe it's just remembering, and it's waiting for someone to finally listen. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the real Bridgewater house looked like before it became a legend? Some say it was a grand old estate, others claim it was a crumbling farmhouse. But in the quiet of the town, people still whisper that it was built on a grave. There's a theory that the house was built on the site of an old battlefield. Some say the blood still seeps into the soil, and that's why the wind howls through the trees like a ghostly army. Others say the house was built by a family who tried to bury their sins and failed. The town's oldest residents say the house was once a haven for the poor, a place where people came to find warmth and shelter. But something changed. One night, the doors slammed shut and no one could get in or out. The next morning, the house was empty and the owner was never seen again. Now, the house stands as a reminder of what we can't control. Some say it's haunted by the spirits of the lost. Others say it's a warning never build on a grave. But no one dares to go near it anymore, not even the brave. You've followed this story through the decades, through the whispers of the past, but the truth remains just out of reach. It's like trying to grasp smoke in your hands, always there, but never quite solid. The last official report was filed in 1968, but the case was never closed. It's one of those unsolved mysteries that haunts the town like a ghost in the attic, never quite leaving, but never quite being seen. People still talk about the Bridgewater house. They say it's not the house that's haunted, it's the memory of what happened there. And that memory, it seems, is still waiting to be remembered. So here's the thing, dear listener, sometimes the most chilling stories aren't the ones we hear. They're the ones we never quite finish telling. And if you ever find yourself walking that lonely road, just remember, sometimes the best way to find the truth is to let it find you. You've heard the whispers of the Bridgewater house, but did you ever wonder what it's like to walk its halls in the quiet of dawn? There's a stillness there, like the house is holding its breath. Sometimes the most haunted places are the ones that seem to forget they're haunted. You can feel it in the air, a kind of quiet ache, like the house is waiting for something it can't name. And sometimes the ghosts aren't the ones you hear, they're the ones you feel. A cold draft, a door that won't close, a silence that stretches too long. So, as we turn the page, remember this: some stories are not meant to be solved, they're meant to be felt. And sometimes, the most chilling thing is that they never end. You've heard of the ocean's wrath, but have you ever heard of a ship that was never meant to sail? The SS Morro Castle, a luxury liner that vanished in 1935, leaving behind more questions than answers. Built for the wealthy, it was more like a floating resort, complete with a swimming pool, ballroom, and even a rooftop garden. But it was never built to survive the sea's fury. The story of the Morro Castle is one of hubris, misfortune, and the sea's merciless embrace. But the tale doesn't end there. It lingers in the water, in the whispers of the deep. They say the Morro Castle didn't sink, it was swallowed whole. And now, its secrets are waiting, in the cold, in the dark, beneath the waves. If you're listening, you might be wondering, what happened to those poor souls on board? And why does the sea still keep their story alive? The story begins in 1931, when the SS Morro Castle was launched from the shipyards of New York. A grand cruise liner, it was built to impress, with luxury that rivaled the finest hotels. But behind that shine, there was a secret waiting to be uncovered. The ship's designer, William E. Perry, was a man of vision, but also of ambition. He wanted to create a vessel that would outshine all others. Little did he know, his dream would soon be haunted by the ghosts of its own creation. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Depth smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The Morro Castle's first voyage was supposed to be a triumph, a journey across the Atlantic filled with glamour and laughter. Instead, it became a tragedy that would change everything. The passengers never knew what was coming. The ship's captain, Joseph H. Lally, was a man of calm and control, but even he couldn't predict the storm that would soon wreck his ship and claim many lives. The sea had other plans for the Morro Castle. As the Morro Castle sailed into the unknown, so too did its secrets. The crew and passengers were unaware that the ocean would soon demand a reckoning, and that the ship's fate would be sealed by forces beyond their control. The ship's fate was sealed, but its story was far from over. The Morro Castle became more than a vessel, it became a symbol of both human ambition and the quiet, relentless power of the sea. And now, its secrets linger beneath the waves. You remember the way the sky turned that day, the way the sun seemed to hold its breath before the storm. The Morro Castle was supposed to be a grand, sunlit voyage, but the clouds had already begun to gather secrets. The first real sign came in the form of a whisper, not from the wind, but from the ship itself. A low hum, like the growl of a tired beast, that no one could quite place. The crew began to talk in hushed tones about the ship's old wounds, the way it had been built on the bones of a shipwreck, and how the sea never forgets. But the real worry came not from the sea, but from within, from the way the passengers began to act strangely, as if they, too, could feel the weight of the past pressing down on them. And then, just before the storm broke, the ship let out a sound, a groan, deep and resonant, like a sigh from the grave. You can imagine the crew's faces, the way they exchanged glances, the way the air grew heavy with the knowledge that something was about to wake up. You remember that moment, don't you? The night the Morro Castle turned on its passengers and the sea swallowed its secret whole. The sky was heavy, the air thick with the scent of salt and something else, something wrong. The captain was in his quarters and the rest of the crew was gone. Some say he locked himself in, others say he vanished. What's certain is that the lights went out and the storm began to howl like a wounded beast. Then came the silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl, the kind that lingers after the last scream has faded. And in that silence, the sea swallowed the ship whole, leaving only a whisper of what had happened. No bodies were found, no survivors, just a ship that had once been afloat and then gone, as if the sea had never wanted it to be there in the first place. And that's when the rumors began. The ship was cursed. The captain was a man who had done something terrible. The sea had taken everything, and it wasn't done yet. So now, every time the wind howls and the sea stirs, they say the Morro Castle is coming back. And this time, it won't be so quiet. I remember the first time I heard the story of the Morro Castle. It was from an old friend who said she had a relative who sailed on that ship. She said the sea was calm that night, but the air was thick with something else, like the weight of secrets. The crew said the ship was cursed, but they didn't know why. Some said it was the ghost of the captain, others said it was the sea itself, remembering the lives it had taken. She tried to call for help, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. When the lifeboats came, she was gone, just her dress floating in the water, like a warning from the past. The real tragedy, though, was the silence that followed. No one spoke of the ship for years. not even the survivors. They said the sea had taken more than just lives, it had taken their voices too. To this day, if you listen closely, you can still hear the Morro Castle, not in the waves, but in the wind, whispering through the trees like it's trying to tell you something you're not ready to hear. The first thing they found was the ship's log, yellowed and brittle, its pages whispering of a night that never ended. It's like reading a diary from a ghost who never woke up. They dug up old newspapers, and the stories were just as strange as the ship itself. One headline read, "Morro Castle sinks, 300 souls lost to the sea." But the article didn't say why. They found a sealed box with the sailors' belongings, including a letter. It was written in a shaky hand, and it ended with, "I don't know why I'm still here." One of the investigators said he heard a voice in the silence calling his name. He wasn't alone in that. Others said they too heard whispers from the deep. They found no bodies, but they found something else, pieces of the ship, still afloat, as if the ocean itself was holding on to its secrets. And then, there was the final piece of the puzzle. A child's toy, found half buried in the sand. It had no name, no owner, and it was still warm to the touch. You know, the thing that still haunts me isn't the fire or the ship, it's the one detail that no one ever seems to talk about. What exactly did they do to the bodies? No one knows, and no one wants to ask. It's like the ocean itself holds its breath, waiting for someone to finally ask the question that's been buried for decades. But no one does. It's too painful, too strange, too close to the truth. The truth is out there, hidden in the wreckage, in the old logs, in the whispers of the crew. But it's not something we're meant to find. It's something we're meant to remember and leave alone. So, what do you think? Was it a mistake, a cover-up, or something worse? The ocean doesn't care. It just keeps its secrets, waiting for someone brave enough to ask the question and smart enough to know when to stop. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals truly whisper in the dark? They say the Morro Castle's ghost is still out there, hunting for the one who let it go. Some say it's the captain's ghost, still chasing the one who betrayed him. Others believe it's the ship itself, a restless soul trapped in the sea's embrace, yearning for redemption. There are those who claim the Morro's curse is still alive, and the only way to break it is to find a lost logbook. But most of them are too afraid to look. Others say the ship's fate was sealed long ago, and the only thing left to do is honor the loss. But then, why did the waves still whisper their names at night? The truth, of course, is somewhere in between. But in places like this, where the sea remembers, the truth is often just a story waiting to be told. So many years have passed, yet the Morro Castle still holds its breath. What if the truth is still waiting in the dark, just beyond the reach of our grasp? We've searched for answers, but the sea has no memory and time has no remorse. Maybe the ship never really left the water at all. Perhaps the mystery is not in the past, but in the present, in the whispers of the wind, the pull of the tide, and the silence that lingers too long. And maybe, just maybe, the Morro Castle is still watching, waiting for someone to listen, to remember, to finally call out to the sea. So I ask you, dear listener, what will you do with the truth when you find it? Will you let it rest, or will you carry it with you, like a secret that never dies? You know, sometimes the ocean doesn't just take lives, it takes stories, too. And when it does, it leaves behind something even quieter than silence. The Morro Castle was more than a ship, it was a life, a dream, a home. And now, it's just a memory, like the echoes of the sirens that once called her to the sea. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tale that's been waiting for its own moment to speak. One that's just as quiet, and just as haunting. Stay with me, dear friends, and let's hear what the next story has to say. You've heard of the Titanic, but have you ever heard of the Morro Castle? A grand, white ship that sailed with the glitter of the Caribbean, only to vanish like a ghost in the night. Built in 1932, it was the pride of the American line. A luxurious cruise ship that promised more than just a trip, it promised a life of elegance, and then silence. The ship was more than a vessel, it was a symbol of hope, a dream on water. But dreams have a way of ending in the dark, don't they? And then, in the early hours of a stormy morning, it vanished. No distress call, no bodies, just the eerie silence of a ship that had been lost to time. Now, decades later, people still speak of the Morro Castle in hushed tones, like it's still out there, waiting for the right moment to return. You know, the Morro Castle wasn't just any ship. It was a grand, white liner built for the wealthy, a floating palace with marble bathrooms and a swimming pool. But it was more than a ship, it was a symbol of the Roaring Twenties, a time of extravagance and reckless optimism. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. It was built by the American Line, a company that had dreams as big as the ocean. They wanted to outshine the British, and the Morro Castle was their answer. But even the fanciest ships can't outrun fate. The Morro Castle wasn't just a ship, it was a place where the rich came to escape the world, and where, in the end, they found themselves lost. The sea doesn't care about your wealth or your reputation. It takes what it wants. But even before it vanished, the Morro Castle had a reputation for being a bit unsettled. Some say it was cursed, others say it was just a ship that had seen too much. Whatever the truth, it was doomed the moment it left port. You know how sometimes, even in the middle of the sea, the sky can look like it's holding its breath? Well, that's exactly what the Morro Castle's crew saw that first night. A pale, sickly light creeping over the water like the sun had been smothered by a black veil. The captain, a man who'd sailed these waters for decades, said it felt like the world had stopped turning. He swore the wind had gone silent and the sea had forgotten how to breathe. It was the first time the ship had ever felt watched. Then came the whispers, not from the wind, not from the waves, but from the ship itself. Some said it was the voices of the passengers. Others claimed they heard the ship's own name being called in a language no one understood. The crew started to question their own senses. One man swore he saw a woman in a white dress standing at the bow, her face turned toward the horizon. Another said he saw a child's toy floating into water, perfectly still, like it had been tossed there just that morning. And then, just before the storm hit, the compass started spinning on its own. Not a little, not a flicker, full circle, over and over, like the ship was trying to tell them something they weren't ready to hear. You can almost hear the wind howling through the old rigging as the Morro Castle shudders on the waves. The crew is in chaos, the ship is listing, and the ocean is swallowing the light. The radio crackles with desperate voices, but no one can reach shore. The captain's voice is steady, but you can feel the panic beneath every word. We're losing power, we're running out of time. Then, the lights go out. The ship plunges into darkness, and the silence is louder than any scream. You can imagine the crew stumbling, the crash of waves, the sound of something breaking in the engine room. The last voice on the radio is the captain's calm, but not calm enough. We're not going to make it. This ship is gone. And then nothing. Just static. And silence. They never found the Morro Castle. Just the wreckage and the stories. And the ghost of a ship that vanished in the night with a crew that never made it home. I've spoken with several survivors of the Morro Castle's final voyage, and what they describe is more than just a ship in a storm. One man said the lights flickered like a dying heartbeat, and the sea turned black as if it were holding its breath. Another told me about a ghostly figure in the crow's nest, just a shadow with eyes that never blinked, watching everything, waiting for something to go wrong. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a woman, just a presence that made the air feel colder. There's a story that during the fire, a woman in the engine room saw a man in a tuxedo, standing in the flames, his face twisted in despair. He said nothing, just looked at her, and then vanished into the smoke. Even the crew's last message, sent to the Coast Guard, was strange. It wasn't about the fire or the danger, it was a plea, please tell the world what we saw. Tell them there's something in the sea that doesn't want to be found. The investigators started with the logs, but the records were more like whispers scratched and faded, like the ghost of the ship herself. They found names, dates, and a few strange entries that didn't quite add up. One entry mentioned a shutter in a hull on the night of the fire. No one knew what it meant, but it felt like a warning, like the ship was trying to tell someone something before it vanished. The most unsettling find was a diary entry from a passenger who claimed she saw a shadow on the water the night before the fire. She didn't know what it was, but it made her feel like she was being watched. Then there was the radio log. It said the ship called for help just before it went down, but the message was cut off. Some say it was a warning, others say it was just static. Either way, it left a silence that never faded. The deeper they looked, the more they realized the Morro Castle wasn't just lost, it was hiding something. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't done with its story yet. There's one thing they never explained, and it's the most chilling part of all. You see, the fire wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mystery wrapped in smoke. No one knows exactly how the fire started. Was it an accident, or was it something more? The official report says a kitchen fire, but the truth is buried in the silence of the ocean. And here's the kicker, the fire spread so fast, it's like the ship itself was alive, burning from within. Some say the crew tried to save it, but it was too late. The ship didn't just sink, it vanished. To this day, no one knows what happened in the final moments. Was it a fire, or was it something else? Something that doesn't belong to the sea. And that's the thing that's never been explained. Not the fire, not the sinking, just the silence. The silence after the last cry was heard. You've heard the tales of the Morro Castle's fate, but the locals still have their own ghosts. They say the wind carries the voices of the lost, and the waves remember every soul that fell. Some say the ship's bell still rings at midnight, echoing from the rocks where it crashed. Others claim the crew's spirits haunt the lighthouse, guiding the lost back to shore. The locals tell of a man who tried to find the ship's remains, only to be lost to the waves himself. His family still keeps a candle burning in the window, waiting for his return. And then there are those who say the Morro Castle never sank at all, that it's still out there, waiting for the right storm, the right time, and the right soul to call it home. You know, even today, the Morro Castle's ghost lingers in the stories of those who still believe. Some say it haunts the waters, waiting for the next soul to make the same mistake. No one knows for sure what happened that night, and that's what makes it so haunting. It's not the end of a story, it's the beginning of a question that never gets answered. The truth is out there, somewhere, buried in the depths of the ocean and the silence of the archives. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for someone to listen. So the next time you're out on the water, listen closely. Sometimes, the ocean speaks not in words, but in whispers that echo through the waves. And if you hear something, well, maybe it's just the wind. Or maybe it's something else. Something that never left. You know, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones that never quite make it to the light. Like the Morro Castle, drifting in the dark, a ghost in the sea. We talk about the stories, the legends, but sometimes the silence is the most powerful story of all. And you, dear listener, you might just be the one to bring it back to life. So, if you're ever near the Atlantic, and you hear a faint whistle in the wind, listen closely. Because some stories don't end. They just wait for the next chapter. You've heard of the ocean's many moods, but have you ever heard of a ship that vanished like a whisper in the night? The SS Morro Castle, once a grand ocean liner, now rests in the deep, where only the sea remembers its story. Built in the 1930s, the Morro Castle was more than just a ship. It was a floating palace, a place where the wealthy came to escape the world, only to find themselves lost at sea. But on the night of September 9, 1935, the Morro Castle vanished without a sound, leaving behind only the echo of its final scream and the sorrow of those who never made it home. The tragedy remains unsolved, a ghostly chapter in maritime history, a story that haunts the waters of the Caribbean and the hearts of those who remember. You've heard the name, but let me tell you how it began. The SS Morro Castle was no ordinary ship. She was a luxury liner, a floating palace, and a symbol of the golden age of ocean travel. She sailed under the American flag, but her heart was built in New York. Her builder was a man named William Cramp, a shipbuilder with a passion for grandeur. He designed the Morro Castle to be the pride of the Atlantic, with marble halls, crystal chandeliers, and a promenade that stretched like a dance floor across the deck. But even as she gleamed with luxury, the Morro Castle carried secrets. She was built with a hidden chamber, a secret room that would later be called the Ghost Room. It was said to be a place where the ship's owners kept their most valuable cargo, money, jewels, and perhaps something more. The Morro Castle was more than a ship. She was a symbol of ambition, of the American dream, and of the dangers that come with chasing the extraordinary. She sailed under the stars, but her fate was written in the silence that followed her last voyage. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You remember the night the Morro Castle slipped away, didn't you? It was a calm, clear evening, and the crew was just getting settled for the long haul across the Atlantic. But then, the radio crackled, and the first whispers of something wrong began to drift through the ship like a ghost in the wind. The first signs were small. A few missing tools, a few unexplained voices in the engine room, a sense that the ship was being watched. The crew dismissed it as the stress of the journey, but you can feel the weight of those quiet moments now, can't you? The radio started picking up strange signals, not voices, but something more like a hum, a vibration in the air. Some said it was the ocean, others that the ship had a ghost in its hold, but no one could explain the way the ship seemed to drift, as if it had no anchor at all. And then, the first real sign of something wrong, a man on the bridge, alone, staring at the horizon. His face was pale, his hands shaking. He said nothing, just stared, as if waiting for something to happen. You can almost feel the silence pressing in around him, like a weight. You see it now, the Morro Castle, a grand ocean liner, glowing like a dream on the dark Atlantic. The night is calm, the sea still, and the world seems to hold its breath. But beneath that beauty, the air is thick with something else. A tension that clings to the ship like a mist, unseen but felt by all. And then, the moment that shattered everything. A cry, a crash, a silence that swallowed the sound, and the world was never the same again. The Morro Castle vanished like a ghost, leaving only whispers and questions behind. No one knew what happened that night, not even the crew. And to this day, the ocean still remembers. It keeps its secrets, and we are left to wonder, was it a tragedy, a crime, or something far more unnatural? I remember the fire so clearly, like it was yesterday. The sky was black and the sea was white, but the worst part? The screams. They didn't sound like people. They sounded like something was inside them, clawing its way out. One woman swore she saw a figure in the water, just before the fire took her. She said it looked like a woman, but its eyes were glowing, like embers from the flames. It didn't move. It just watched. Others said the fire wasn't just in the wood. They said it was in the air, in the water, in the bones of the ship itself. That it wasn't fire at all, but something else, something that had been waiting for a long time. And then there were the ones who never made it out. The ones who vanished without a sound. They were never found, and the ship, the fire, the sea, none of it ever explained what happened to them. You know, the first thing investigators found was a single pair of men's socks, half burned and tucked into a locker near the engine room. It was like the ship had been stripped down to its bones, and even the ghosts were hiding. They found a logbook that had been torn in half, the pages curling like dried leaves. It ended abruptly, as if the last entry had been erased by someone with a lot of fear and a lot of time. One officer claimed he saw a shadow on the bridge, moving like it had a mind of its own. He described it as tall, with a deep voice that echoed through the ship like a warning. Then there were the records of the crew. Some names were missing, others were listed as missing in action without explanation. It felt like the ship had swallowed its own people whole. The strangest thing of all? The ship's bell. It was found in the captain's quarters, still hanging, but with no one to ring it. It just sat there, waiting for someone to give it a purpose again. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me about the Morro Castle is the missing engine room. It's like the ship just vanished into the sky, leaving behind a skeleton of steel and sorrow. They say the engine room was sealed off before the fire, but no one ever found the door. It's like the ship took it with it, or maybe it's still there, waiting for someone to unlock it. No one knows what happened in that engine room. Was it a last stand, a hidden secret, or maybe something worse? The truth is still locked in there, just like the door. And so, the engine room remains the one detail that has never been explained. A mystery that's been sleeping in the dark, waiting for someone to listen. You know, the Morro Castle isn't just a ship, it's a ghost in the memory of the town. Some say the wind off the coast carries its name, like a lullaby for the lost. Local kids used to say the castle would appear at night, just before the storm. They'd tell me it looked like a ship in a dream, all glowing and soft, like it was made of moonlight. There's even a story about a captain who never drowned, but instead became a part of the sea itself. He's said to ride the tides, always searching for the one who left him behind. And then there are the rumors no one knows where the ship went, but some say is still out there, waiting for the right storm, the right hour, and the right soul to call it home. Even now, the Morro Castle story lingers like a whisper in the dark. No one knows for sure what happened that night, and that's what makes it so haunting. Some say the ocean itself holds the truth, but it's too deep, too cold, and too silent to give it up easily. Others believe the ghosts never let go. We'll never know if it was a storm, a fire, or something more natural, but the sea doesn't forget, and neither do those who sailed with it. The Morro Castle is gone, but its story remains. A tale of ambition, tragedy, and the sea's unyielding grip. And some say it's still waiting for us to find it. You can almost hear the waves whispering through the silence, like a lullaby for the lost. The Morro Castle isn't just a ship, it's a memory, a ghost of the sea, waiting for the right tide to return. And sometimes, when the wind carries the scent of salt and old wood, you might think you see a figure in the distance, just a shadow, a whisper, a flicker of movement, then nothing. But remember, dear listener, some stories are meant to linger, not be solved. They are the kind of tales that stay with you, like a song you can't quite remember but you know it when you hear it. So, as we part ways, I'll leave you with a question: what if the Morro Castle wasn't lost at all? What if it's still out there, somewhere, waiting for the next story to begin? You've heard of the ocean's secrets, but have you heard of the SS Morro Castle? A luxury liner that sailed the Caribbean, only to vanish in a storm and never return. Built in 1932, the ship was a floating palace, with ballrooms, lounges, and even a chapel. But it was more than just a place to travel, it was a place to disappear. Now, decades later, people say it still sails, not in the open sea, but in the minds of those who believe in the supernatural, and in the stories that refuse to drown. And if you ever find yourself on the shores of Florida, you might just hear the echo of a ship's horn, a sound that never fades and never stops. You know, the Morro Castle wasn't always a ghost ship. It started as a dream, a luxury liner built for the wealthy, with a name that meant Mount of Light in Spanish. Imagine, if you will, a grand vessel, all brass and silk, sailing into the Caribbean like it had no cares. It was commissioned by the Cuban government, you see, for a transatlantic route, but they changed their mind. So instead, it became a floating hotel, serving the rich and famous. Think of it as a floating palace with dining rooms that could feed 100 and ballrooms that echoed with laughter. Its designer, William J. Olith, was no ordinary man. He had a reputation for building ships that could cut through the sea like a knife, but he also had a temper, and that temper was known to flare when things didn't go his way. And then there was the captain, a man named William R. L.S.F. Smith, who had a reputation for being as reliable as the tides. He was the one who would eventually take the ship on its last, fateful voyage, a voyage that would change everything. So, you see, the Morro Castle was born from ambition, built by visionaries, and destined for greatness. But greatness, as we all know, has a price. And that price was waiting for it on the horizon. You know how sometimes the sea just stops, like it's holding its breath? That's when the Morro Castle first started to feel it. The crews said the water grew still, the waves held their hands up like they were pleading for mercy. The radio crackled with static, and the captain's voice was like a whisper through a storm. He said the compass spun like a drunk man, and the stars above seemed to blink out one by one. It was as if the ship had lost its way in both sea and sky. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dubsith, the smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Then came the silence. Not the kind of silence you find in a quiet room, but the kind that fills your bones. The crew said they could hear the water whispering in a language they didn't know, like it was trying to tell them something they weren't ready to understand. The first real sign was when the lighthouse on Montauk began to blink in a pattern no one could explain. It wasn't just a light, it was a message. And the message was clear. The Morro Castle wasn't just lost. It was being watched. You ever notice how the sea has a way of making you feel like you're not alone? That's what the Morro Castle crew felt. Like something was in the water with them, waiting. And it wasn't just the sea, it was the ship itself. It was alive, and it was screaming. You remember the night the Morro Castle vanished? The radio crackled with warnings, but the world kept spinning. You thought it was a storm, but it was something else entirely. The ship was supposed to be safe, but the captain had a secret, a hidden compartment, a hidden truth, and a hidden fear that would never reach the shore. The passengers never made it to shore. Some say they were taken, others say they drowned, but no one knows what happened to the captain's secret. To this day, the sea remembers. It doesn't speak, but you can feel it watching, waiting, holding on to the secrets that were never meant to be found. I remember the first time I heard about the Morro Castle. It was from an old sailor who claimed he saw it rise from the sea like a ghost ship, its lights flickering like a dying star. He said the ship was always there, just beyond the reach of the shore, and that the crew never returned to tell the tale. Some say the Morro Castle was cursed by the sea itself, and that the souls of the drowned still cling to its hull, waiting for the right moment to return. But the most unsettling thing about the Morro Castle isn't the ship, it's the people who claim to have seen it, and the silence that follows. They don't talk about it much, but when they do, their voices drop, and the air gets heavy with something you can't quite name. And that, dear listeners, is the true horror of the Morro Castle, not the ship, not the sea, but the silence that follows the last whisper of its name. We started digging into the Morro Castle's past, and what we found was like peeling back the layers of a rotten apple. The records were sparse, but there were whispers of strange behavior, of crew members acting like they were in a trance. One file mentioned a sailor who'd been found staring at the horizon for hours, muttering about seeing the ghost of the ship. Another log entry described a crewman who vanished without a trace, only to be found days later with no memory of what had happened. The ship's last captain, Henry D. Stimson, had a habit of waking in the middle of the night, whispering to himself, and once was found standing at the bow, staring into the abyss with a look of deep, unspoken sorrow. Then there were the accounts of the ship's radio operator, who claimed he'd been receiving messages from the past, warnings that the Morro Castle was doomed, and that it would never reach its destination. And in the end, we found one final, chilling note, one that didn't belong to the ship's records at all. It was written in someone's handwriting, and it read, "The Morro Castle is still out there, and it's waiting." You know, the thing that haunts me most isn't the screams or the cold, it's that one little detail that's never been explained. The night the Morro Castle sank, a woman was seen walking the deck, singing to the sea. No one knows who she was, or why she was there. She was never found. Not in the wreckage. Not in the records. Just gone. Like she had been swallowed by the ocean, or maybe by the silence of the night. You ever wonder what it feels like to be the last person on a sinking ship? To hear the ship groan, to feel the water rise, and to know you're not going to make it. But what if you're not even real anymore? That woman's song still echoes in the waves. Some say it's a warning, others say it's just the sea remembering, but I think it's something else entirely. Something we're not meant to understand. So, what do you think? Was she real? Or was she just the sea's way of telling us a story we're never going to finish? You've heard the stories, but what about the people who still chase them? Some say Moro Castle's ghost is a warning, not a tragedy. Others believe it's a woman's voice calling from the waves. There are those who say the ship's last radio call wasn't just a cry for help, it was a message to the sea, a promise that the drowned would never be forgotten. You ever think about what it's like to be the last to know? And then there are the ones who say the Moro Castle never really sank, that it's still out there, waiting for the right moment to rise again, like a sleeping beast, ready to wake. So, what do you think? Is the Moro Castle a warning, a memory, or something else entirely? The sea has a way of keeping secrets, and sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions. Even now, decades later, the Moro Castle still whispers its secrets from the depths. No one really knows what happened that night, and that's what makes it so haunting. The mystery isn't just about the ship, it's about the people who were on board, the ones who vanished without a trace, and the ones who never found their way home. There's a quiet desperation in the search for answers. Every new clue feels like a step closer, but also like a step into something we weren't meant to find. Maybe the Moro Castle never really sank. Maybe it's still out there, waiting for someone to listen, to remember, to finally bring the truth to the surface. And that, my dear, is why we keep coming back to the Moro Castle, not for the ghosts, but for the story that still hasn't finished. You know, sometimes the sea doesn't just take lives, it takes stories. And sometimes those stories refuse to be buried. The Moro Castle may be gone, but its ghosts still drift through the waves, waiting for someone to listen. And if you ever find yourself near the coast, listen closely. Sometimes the ocean speaks in hushed tones, and it's not always a warning. But for now, let's leave the sea to its secrets and turn the page to another tale, one that's just as old and just as haunting. You've heard of the whaler Hesperus, haven't you? That old, wooden beast that sailed the waters of New England like a ghost in the fog. Some say it was cursed the moment it left port. It was built in the 1840s, a proud ship with a reputation for catching whales in record time. But the men who sailed on her, they never returned the same. Some say they were eaten by the sea, others say they were devoured by their own greed. The Hesperus was never found, but the stories never die. Locals say the sea still remembers her, and if you listen closely, you can hear her creaking in the distance, like a ship that's still alive but not quite dead. And now, decades later, people still whisper about the Hesperus. They say the wind carries its name in the night, and that the sea never forgets a soul that tried to tame it. So, what do you think? Is the Hesperus just a ghost story, or is it something far more real? I'd love to hear your thoughts, but be careful where you look when the wind picks up. You ever heard of the Hesperus? It wasn't just a ship, it was a beast. Built in 1821, it was the pride of New Bedford, Massachusetts, a whaler that chased the sea like it was its lover. But love can be dangerous, especially when the sea doesn't return what it takes. The crew was a mix of hardened sailors and desperate dreamers, all chasing fortune in the vast, uncharted Pacific. They had a captain, Elias Vane, a man with a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. He didn't just sail the seas, he commanded them. The Hesperus left port with a full hold, but it wasn't long before the sea began to take its toll. Men vanished, their bodies never found. Some say the crew saw a ghostly figure in the mist, a woman with long, flowing hair, crying out for help. Others say it was just the sea, cruel and indifferent. In the end, the Hesperus never returned. Some say it was swallowed by a whale, others that it was cursed by the sea itself. But no matter the tale, one thing is certain: the Hesperus left a legacy of fear, of loss, and of stories that refuse to die. You remember the way the ocean hums, don't you? A sound so deep it feels like it's been there since the world began. But on the Hesperus the hum turned into something else entirely, something that didn't belong to the sea. The crew began to notice things first: the compass spinning wildly, then the barrels of salted fish sweating without a hint of humidity. It was as if the ship had forgotten how to be real. Then came the whispers, not from the wind, not from the waves, but from the ship itself. The timbers groaned in a language no one could understand, and the sailors began to dream of things they'd never seen. They tried to pray, to curse, to call for help, but the Hesperus had no ears for their voices and no soul to answer their calls. It was as if the ship had become something else, something that had never been meant to sail the sea at all. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You'll never forget the night the Hesperus vanished. It was a storm like none before, with waves that rose like mountains, and the crew's last message said they were losing the mass. The last log entry was a desperate plea: the sea is alive, it's pulling us under. The crew of 23 men never made it to shore. Only the captain's pocket watch was found, its hands frozen at 3:17 a.m. Some say the Hesperus wasn't lost to the sea, it was taken by something deeper. The captain's watch was never found, but in the years that followed, the town's children began to dream of the ship, whispering its name in the dark. To this day, the lighthouse keeper still sees it on foggy nights, a dark shape on the horizon moving against the tide. No one dares to go out. The sea remembers, and the Hesperus is still waiting for its crew. I've read dozens of accounts, but one woman's testimony sticks with me. She claimed to see the Hesperus in a dream, but it felt too real, like she was being pulled into the ocean. She described the ship as a skeletal outline, its mast bending like a broken bone. The crew moved like shadows, and the captain's face was twisted in something between rage and sorrow. Some say the Hesperus isn't a ghost, it's a warning. A ship that never made it back, but kept coming back, like a bad memory that won't let you sleep. I asked a sailor who lived near the coast if he'd ever seen it. He just smiled and said, "You don't see it, you feel it. And once you've felt it, you're never really free." We followed the trail of the Hesperus to its final resting place, a weathered dock in New Bedford, where the air still smells of salt and secrets. The wood creaks like it's whispering to the sea. The captain's log, yellowed and brittle, told of a storm that swallowed the ship whole. But the real mystery wasn't the storm, it was the silence that followed. Then there were the letters from sailors who claimed to have seen the Hesperus on foggy nights, not moving, just floating, like it had never been lost at all. The deeper we got, the more we realized the Hesperus wasn't just a ship, it was a story, a ghost, a warning. And it had been waiting for someone to listen. You know, the most chilling thing about the Hesperus isn't the ghost, or the wreckage, or even the sailors' tales. It's the one detail that's never been explained: why the ship vanished without a single distress call. The last log entry mentions a sudden, violent squall, no mention of a storm, no mention of danger, just silence, like the ship was pulled under by something that didn't make a sound. But here's the thing, no one ever found a body, no one ever saw a ghost, and no one ever saw the ship again. Just nothing, like it was never there at all. And that's why, even after all these years, the Hesperus still haunts the coast. Because no one knows what happened. And maybe that's the scariest thing of all. You've heard the stories, but here in the fishing towns, we don't just whisper them, we live them. The Hesperus isn't just a ship, it's a presence, a memory, a warning. You ever notice how the fog lingers longer around these shores, like it's holding its breath? Some say the captain's ghost still sails these waters, searching for the one who betrayed him. Others claim the ship itself is cursed, trapped in a loop of its own making. But the real question is, what did the Hesperus really carry that no one wants to remember? Some folks say the Hesperus is a warning about greed, about the sea, about the price of chasing something you can't control. Others say it's just a ship. But if you listen closely, the wind carries a sound that doesn't belong to the sea. It sounds like a whistle, a lonely, searching whistle. Theories? There are 1,000. But the truth, that's what the sea keeps. And the sea has a way of keeping its secrets. But if you're ever in the mood for a story that lingers longer than the night, you know where to find me. And you know where to look for the Hesperus. You know, sometimes the worst mysteries aren't solved by detectives or historians, they're just left to fester, like a wound that never closes. And the Hesperus? She's still bleeding. Every year, on the anniversary of her last voyage, people say they hear her screaming, moaning, the sound of a ship in a storm, but no wind, no rain, just silence. Some say she's the captain's wife, others say she's the last survivor. No one knows for sure, but the stories keep coming, like tides, relentless and unending. And now, with the new moon, the whispers grow louder. You can almost hear her calling from the deep, from the place where the Hesperus sank and never came back. So here's the question, dear listener, what if she is still out there? Watching? And what if she never meant to sink but to save someone? You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes, like the Hesperus, which seems to have found a home in the stillness of the sea, whispering to those who dare to listen. But remember, the sea is a fickle mistress. It takes and it gives, and sometimes it takes more than we can ever repay. The Hesperus, I think, is still waiting for someone to return its lost crew. I wonder, do you ever hear the sea whispering your name? Or does it just keep its secrets, like the Hesperus did, for so long? But don't worry, the stories don't end here. The sea has more to tell, and I, for one, am always eager to listen. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That place on the edge of the forest, where the trees seem to lean in just a little too close. It's called the Priory of Sion, and it's got a history that's as thick as the fog that rolls in at dusk. Once a noble estate, it fell into ruin centuries ago. Some say it was a place of secret meetings, others that it was cursed by a tragic love affair. Whatever the truth, the locals still tell stories about voices echoing through the halls at night. The air here is heavy, like it's holding its breath. You can almost hear the silence waiting for something that never came. And yet, the stories say the place still sings in a voice no one can quite place. Some say the priory was built on sacred ground, others that it was a place of betrayal. What's certain is that no one leaves here the same, and if you're brave enough to listen, you might just hear the hollow chorus calling your name. You know, the Priory of Sion didn't start as a place of terror, but as a refuge. It was built in the 12th century by a nobleman named Raymond de Boulogne-Villiers, who sought to protect his family from the chaos of the Crusades. The priory was meant to be a safe haven, a sanctuary for the innocent. But as the years passed, it became more than just a home. It became a place where secrets were buried and whispers began to grow. The priory became a place where knowledge and mystery intertwined. Some say it was protected by a secret order, others claim it was cursed by a vengeful spirit. But the truth, my dear friends, is far more complex. Over time, the priory fell into disrepair and its secrets were lost to history, but the echoes of its past still linger, and some say the voices of those who once called it home are never far from the stone walls. You remember the first time you heard the voices, don't you? A whisper in the wind, just before the storm rolled in. It was like the trees were singing a hymn, but it wasn't the kind of song you'd ever hear in church. It wasn't loud, just a low murmur, like someone was calling your name from the past. You turned, but there was no one there, just the echo of the wind and the creak of the old wood in the priory's walls. The next morning, the caretaker found a piece of paper on the floor, folded with care. It read, "They are waiting for you." No signature, just the inked words. You smiled, thinking it was a joke, but the ink had dried before your eyes. That night, you heard it again. This time, it was clearer. The voices were not just in the wind. They were in the walls, in the stone, in the very air you breathed. It was like the priory itself was whispering, trying to tell you something. You told yourself it was just the wind, just the memory of old prayers and ancient sorrow. But deep down, you knew something was watching, waiting, and it was no longer content to be ignored. You see it now, don't you? That first note, so soft, so strange, like a whisper from the past. It was the first time the priory's silence broke, and the air grew heavy with something you couldn't name. The next day, the caretaker found a child's doll half buried in the garden. The strings were cut, the eyes missing. No one could say where it came from or how it got there. A week later, a boy vanished. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just a small, unmarked grave in the garden, and a single, silver bell hung from a tree in the woods. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot 5th smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They say the bell was the last thing heard before the boy disappeared, that it was the first note, the second note, the beginning of a song that never ends. And to this day, the bell still rings at midnight, and the laughter still echoes. But no one ever goes near the east wing. Not anymore. I still remember the first time I heard that whisper in the chapel. It wasn't loud, just a faint sound, like someone humming a melody from the 15th century. One of the caretakers said it was the wind, but he didn't believe his own excuse. He heard it too, and he'd been there for decades. Then there was the nun, who claimed she saw a figure in the cloister at midnight. She said it wore a habit, but the color was wrong, too bright, too unnatural. She never said what the figure wanted, only that it kept repeating a name like it was calling someone back, someone who had long since passed. And the worst part? No one ever found the body. Just a single, blood-stained glove left by the chapel door, and a voice that only the dead could hear. The investigation began with a simple request for old records, but what we found was a labyrinth of secrets. The first clue was a dusty notebook, its pages yellowed and brittle, filled with cryptic symbols and names that didn't match any known history. We followed the trail to a hidden chamber beneath the priory, its entrance sealed with a rusted iron door. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something older, something that clung to the back of the throat. The deeper we went, the more the record spoke of a hidden order, a group that had once operated in secret. They called themselves the Hollow Chorus, and their purpose was never fully explained, only hinted at encoded phrases and unfinished sentences. One of the most unsettling discoveries was a series of letters, written in a woman's hand, describing the priory as a place where time folded in on itself. She spoke of voices in the halls, and a sound that wasn't quite a voice at all, a chorus that never ended. As we left the priory that night, the wind howled through the trees like a voice trying to be heard. We didn't know then that the chorus had already begun to sing again, just below the threshold of our hearing. You ever notice how some details just vanish? Like the missing puzzle piece that's never found. The one thing that should be there, but isn't. That's what's left in the Priory of Sion, and it's the one thing that's never been explained. They say the monks kept records of everything, every name, every event, every whisper of the past. But this is the only thing they never wrote down. It's like the air just forgot. Some say it's a symbol from a forgotten language. Others say it's a warning, but no one knows what it means. It's just there, and it's been there since the day they built this place. You know what's strange? The monks never said anything about it. Not in their writings, not in their oral traditions. Like it was never part of the story. Just missing. So here's the thing. The Priory of Sion has ghosts, but it also has mysteries. And this is the one that haunts them all. The one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the Priory of Sion isn't just a ruin, it's a place where the dead still sing. They say the wind carries their voices, faint and sweet, like a lullaby that never ends. Some say the chorus is the voices of the nuns who once lived there, trapped by their own vows. Others say it's the ghost of a child who never left, still calling for her mother in a language long forgotten. The townsfolk still gather at dusk, some say, to listen. They claim the chorus grows louder on certain nights, like it's waiting for something or someone to come home. But the real mystery, of course, is why the priory was abandoned in the first place. Was it a curse? A cover-up? Or maybe something that never left at all? You know, sometimes the most haunting thing isn't what happened, it's what never did. The Priory of Sion still stands, quiet and unbroken, yet its silence screams louder than any scream. The records are sealed, the truth buried beneath centuries of dust and deception. We're left with echoes, not answers, like a song that fades before the final note. We can't prove the truth, but we can feel it. The wind that whispers through the trees, the way the light lingers on the stones, it all feels like a story waiting to be told. So, I ask you, what if the Priory isn't just haunted? What if it's waiting for the right voice to tell its story, and the right heart to listen? And that, my friends, is why we keep coming back. Not for the ghosts, but for the mystery. The hollow chorus is still singing, and we're just beginning to hear it. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that fade into silence. The Priory of Sion may have whispered its secrets to the wind, but the echoes remain. I wonder if the ghosts still gather there, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to sing again. Or if they've moved on, like all good stories do. There's a comfort in knowing some mysteries never truly end. They linger like a melody, soft and unresolved, waiting for the right listener to hear. And so, we leave the Priory behind, not with answers, but with questions like the wind, always circling, always waiting. But don't worry, dear listener. There's always another tale waiting, just beyond the next hill, just beyond the next whisper. You've heard of the ocean's fury, but have you ever heard of a ship that vanished like smoke in the morning? The SS Morro Castle was no ordinary liner, it was a jewel of the Caribbean, a floating palace of luxury, and now, a ghost in the waves. It was built to impress, with chandeliers that glowed like stars and corridors that hummed with the sound of distant music. But beneath that glamour, something stirred, something the crew never spoke of. The storm that followed was unlike any other, a wall of water, a howling wind, and a silence that fell over the ship like a shroud. The crew scrambled, the passengers screamed, and the Morro Castle was lost to the sea with no survivors. To this day, people say they've seen the Morro Castle in the distance, just beyond the horizon, glowing faintly like a lantern in the dark. Some say it's a warning, others say it's a ghost ship, still waiting for its crew to return. And so, the Morro Castle remains a tale of beauty and tragedy, of a ship that vanished and a mystery that lingers in the water, waiting for someone to listen. You know, the Morro Castle wasn't just a ship, it was a floating palace, a place where the rich came to escape the world below. It was like a cruise ship meets a luxury hotel, and it was all built to impress. It was built by a man named Henry Flagler, a railroad tycoon with a taste for the grandiose. He wanted to show off, and the Morro Castle was his way of saying, I'm rich and I know it. The ship was meant to be more than a cruise, it was a symbol of status. The first-class suites were so lavish, they had their own private elevators, bathrooms with running water, and even a swimming pool. But for all its grandeur, the Morro Castle was also a place of secrets. Some say the ship was cursed, and others say it was just a matter of time before the ocean claimed what it was never meant to hold. And that's where the story really begins. When the ship set sail, it was full of promise, but also full of people with their own secrets, their own desires, and their own reasons for being on that ship. You remember how the night started, don't you? The Morro Castle was sailing smoothly, the sky a deep, velvet blue, the sea a mirror of stars. But then, something shifted. The wind changed, the lights flickered, and the air grew heavy, like it was holding its breath. The captain called it a slight change in the wind, but the crew knew better. The temperature dropped, the compass spun wildly, and the crew began to murmur. It was as if the sea itself had turned against them, and no one could say why. The first real sign came when the radio began to crackle with static. No one could reach the mainland, and the signal grew weaker with each passing hour. It was as if the ship had vanished from the world, and the world had forgotten it. Then came the whispers, not from the wind, but from the ship itself. A low, mournful sound that seemed to come from the hull, like a voice calling out from the depths. The crew tried to ignore it, but it grew louder with each passing moment. The final sign was the silence. The wind stopped, the waves stilled, and the sea became a mirror of glass. No one dared speak. It was as if the Morro Castle had entered a place between worlds, and the world had forgotten it was there. You know, the Morro Castle wasn't just a ship, it was a floating palace, and on that fateful night, it became a tomb. The lights went out, and the music stopped, like the world held its breath. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. One moment, the passengers were dancing, the next, they were screaming. The power failed, and chaos erupted, but no one could see what was coming next. Then, the fire started. No one knows exactly how, but it spread like a nightmare through the ship, and the screams only got louder as the lights went out for good. And in the end, only a few survived. The rest, well, they were lost to the sea, swallowed by the dark, and never seen again. I remember the way the light hit the water that night, like the sea was holding its breath. The Morro Castle wasn't just a ship, it was a dream, and the ocean was the dreamer. One sailor said he saw the ship's lights flicker like a dying star, then vanish. He swore he heard a voice, not from the radio, but from the wind it was calling his name. Another crew member claimed the ship didn't fall apart, it just melted. He said the water turned black, and the hull dissolved like sugar in tea. And then there was the radio operator. He said the last transmission wasn't a scream, it was a whisper. A woman's voice, calm, repeating the same phrase over and over. I'm not alone. Some say the Morro Castle never truly sank, that it's still out there, waiting for the right kind of storm, the right kind of soul to hear its call. The investigation began with a simple question: what happened to the Morro Castle? And then, as they dug deeper, they found more questions than answers, like a trail of whispers in the dark. They found ship logs, crew testimonies, and a few scattered pieces of evidence, but nothing that could explain the sudden disappearance of a vessel and its passengers. One of the strangest things they uncovered was a radio transmission, faint and garbled, that seemed to come from the Morro Castle itself days after it was supposed to have vanished. They found names of passengers who had been reported missing, but no bodies, no wreckage, just silence and a growing sense of something watching from the deep. And then, they found a letter written in a shaky hand dated the night of the disappearance and signed by someone who claimed they were still alive, trapped on the ship. You know, the one thing that has never been explained? The way the ship's bell kept ringing long after the ship had gone dark. Just a single, lonely chime, echoing through the empty halls. No one knows where the sound came from. Some say it was the wind, others the ghosts of the lost. But the bell never stopped. It just kept ringing, like someone was trying to call for help. Even now, decades later, the bell's echo lives on in the stories. It's the only thing that's never been explained, and maybe that's why it haunts us so much. So, what do you think? Did the bell call for help, or was it just the last whisper of a ship that never made it home? You've heard the stories, but here in the tiny fishing village of Daytona Beach, they say the Morro Castle isn't just a ghost, it's a ghost with a grudge. They whisper that the ship's final moments are still playing out in the waves, and that the sea doesn't forget. Some say the ship's radio operator, the only man who tried to send a distress signal, is still heard on the radio, calling for help, but no one ever answers. Others say the ship was cursed long before it ever left port. And then there's the theory that the ship never sank at all, that it vanished and the survivors were never found, that the Morro Castle is still out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return. So next time you're walking along the beach, maybe you'll hear a voice in the wind, or feel a chill where the waves meet the shore. Maybe you will remember that some stories don't end, they just wait for the right moment to be told. So here we are, still chasing shadows, still looking for answers. The Morro Castle story isn't just about a ship, it's about a mystery that refuses to let go, like a ghost who won't cross over. Every new clue seems to lead to more questions. Was it a storm, a fire, a curse? Or did someone with a grudge make it all happen? And here's the real kicker. No one really knows what happened. Not the survivors, not the victims, not the ones who still live with the weight of it. So, dear listener, what do you think? Is there a truth out there, waiting to be found? Or is the Moro Castle still out there, waiting for us to remember? You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The Moro Castle may be gone, but its story lingers like a half-remembered dream. And just like that ship, sometimes the most terrifying mysteries don't end with a scream, but with a silence that stretches too long. So, as we close this tale, I wonder what stories are waiting just beyond the edge of your own memory. Stay with me, dear friends. There's always another story just around the corner, and sometimes it's the most unexpected ones that haunt us the longest. You've heard of the old stones, the whispering woods, the places that remember. But have you ever heard of the Priory of Saint Foy? It's not just a name, it's a place that hums with secrets, like a lullaby you can't quite place. Nestled in the heart of a forgotten valley, it's a place where the past clings to the present like ivy on a tomb. The air here is thick with something ancient, like the weight of centuries pressing down on the earth. It was built in the 12th century, a sanctuary for the poor and the sick, but it became something else entirely. Rumors say the monks practiced unspeakable rituals, and that the stones themselves began to weep in the night. Some say the priory was cursed by its founder, a nobleman who sought to build a place of salvation, but instead, he built a prison for the soul. Others say it was a place of miracles, and that the miracles came with a price. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: the Priory of Saint Foy is not empty. It remembers, it waits, and it will not let go. You know, back in the 12th century, this place was more than just a church, it was a fortress. The Priory of Saint Foy stood tall, with stone walls thick enough to keep out both invaders and the devil himself. It was built by a noble family, the de Montforts, who had a reputation for being as fierce as they were devout. They saw the priory as a place to protect their lands and their souls. The knights brought with them not only their swords but also their cryptic rituals. Some say they met in secret chambers beneath the priory, where the air would grow cold and the shadows would move on their own. And then came the Black Death. The priory became a refuge, a place of last rites and whispered prayers, where the sick and the dying found solace in the arms of the faithful. But even in death, the priory never truly slept. The echoes of its past linger, and the spirits of those who once called it home still walk its halls, waiting for the right moments to be heard. You remember how the air felt that day, thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that didn't belong. The kind of silence that doesn't mean nothing's there, but that something is. The monks had gone quiet, their voices replaced by the whisper of wind through the trees. You could almost hear the stones groan as if they were remembering a time before time. The caretaker found the first clue in the cloister garden, a rosebush that had bloomed in the wrong season. It was red, like blood, and the petals were shaped like fingers reaching toward the sky. That night, the caretaker awoke to the sound of footsteps on stone, echoing through the halls. No one was there, but the air smelled like incense and something sweet and wrong. The first real sign came with the missing cross, the one that had hung in the chapel for centuries. It was found later, broken and half buried in the garden, as if it had been tossed there by an unseen hand. You see it now, don't you? The old stone gate, moss creeping up like a whispered secret, the air so thick you could cut it with a knife. It's not just the weather, it's something else. Something waiting. One rainy November night, a young couple arrived, drawn by rumors of a hidden garden. They were never seen again. The last message found in their cottage was just a single word: wait. The villagers say the priory knows what happened, that it's not the woods that are dangerous, but the place itself, that it waits for those who dare to stay too long. So you're here now, aren't you? Curious, aren't you? But be careful. Some places don't forget, and some places don't want you to leave. I spoke to a retired school teacher named Mabel, who said she saw a woman in a 19th century dress standing by the chapel's altar just before the lights went out. She claimed the woman didn't move when she approached, just looked at her with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Another witness, a local historian, swore he heard the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the crypt at midnight, though no one was around. He said it was like the laughter came from inside the walls, as if the stone itself was remembering something it shouldn't. These testimonies, though fragmented, paint a picture of a place that doesn't just haunt, it remembers. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. We followed the trail of whispers through the ruins, each step stirring up the dust of centuries. The air here was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, something that clung to the bones of the place. The investigation led us to the old chapel, where the silence was louder than any sound. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the air felt like it held its breath, waiting for something to break. One night, as we set up our equipment, the wind picked up and howled through the broken windows like a chorus of the lost. We turned, and for a moment, it felt like the walls themselves were watching. The deeper we went, the more the past seemed to press in on us. It wasn't just the ghosts, it was the weight of history, the echoes of pain and silence that had shaped this place for centuries. And then, just as we thought we had uncovered the truth, the silence returned, deeper, heavier, as if the place had exhaled and was holding its breath once more. You know, there's one thing that's always bugged me about the Priory. The records don't say a single word about the day the bell rang. Not a single word, just a silence so deep, it's like the world held its breath. That bell, big, bronze, and older than the stones of the Priory itself, was never mentioned in any of the local histories. No mention of its sound, its shape, or even its purpose. Just a note that it rang, and then nothing. The only thing that's ever been found was a single, broken chain that led from the bell to the ground. No one knows if it was meant to hold it up, or if it was meant to silence it. The chain is rusted, twisted, and half buried in the soil. You ever wonder if that bell was ever meant to ring again? If it ever will? Or if it's just waiting, like the rest of us, for something to finally make it stop? You've heard the names, but the stories are different in every town. Some say it's a cursed love, others say it's a pact with the devil. What do you think really happened here? One local claims the ghost of a prioress still walks the cloisters, weeping over her lost soul. Another insists it's the spirit of a child, trapped between two worlds. The oldest tales say the Priory was built on a site where a witch once made a pact. She promised her soul for power, but the price was more than she expected. And then there are the new ones, the ones whispered in the dark, passed down like a secret, never fully shared. What do you think they are hiding? And so, we return to the question that haunts this place: what truly happened to the last of the Priory's keepers? No one knows, not even the scholars who have studied this place for decades. The final entry in the journal was dated the day the bells stopped ringing, and the last entry was a single line: "The walls are listening." It was never explained, and no one has ever found the journal again. Some say the wind that howls through these halls carries the voice of the keepers, still whispering their final warning. Others believe the Priory is a prison for something far older than the stones themselves. What we do know is that the mystery remains unsolved, and the Priory still stands silent, watchful, waiting for the right person to come along and listen. And so, the story ends not with a resolution, but with a question that lingers like the scent of old incense: what happened to the last of the keepers, and why does the Priory still remember? You know, sometimes the most haunting echoes aren't in the past, but in the present, waiting just beneath the surface of the ordinary, ready to remind us we're never truly alone. And as you turn the page of this story, I wonder what ancient whispers might be waiting in the silence of your own home. So, if you ever feel the cold of something unseen, don't be afraid to let it linger a moment longer. Sometimes, the best stories are the ones that make you feel just a little bit less alone. And now, as we turn the page, I'll leave you with one final thought: what if the past isn't so far away, after all? You've heard the name, but I bet you've never thought about the place itself. The Titanic wasn't just a ship. It was a dream made of steel and ambition, a floating palace that vanished beneath the icy Atlantic, leaving behind more than just wreckage. Built in 1912, it was supposed to be unsinkable, a promise that would soon be shattered by the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic. But even in its prime, it carried a strange, lingering aura, like it had secrets it wasn't ready to tell. Now, decades later, the wreck sits at the bottom of the ocean, a silent tomb of lost lives and unanswered questions. Some say the spirits of the dead still linger, their sorrow echoing through the deep, waiting for someone to listen. And that's where we begin, not with the disaster itself, but with the place itself. A ship that was meant to be eternal, yet now rests in the cold, waiting for its story to be remembered. You know, the Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of human ambition, built to be the pinnacle of luxury and engineering. It was a dream made of steel and hope, sailing into history with a promise of safety. It was conceived by a man named J.P. Morgan, who wanted the world to see the United States as a leader in the race for oceanic supremacy. He commissioned the ship to be the largest and most advanced of its time. And then there were the passengers, rich and poor alike, all bound for a new beginning. Some were eager to escape their lives, others to chase fortunes, and a few simply wanted to see the world. But behind the glamour and grandeur, there were whispers of doubt. Some said the ship was too big, too fast, too full of hubris. And in the end, it was all of that doomed it to the icy depths. You can imagine the calm of that evening, the way the sea shimmered under the moonlight, like a mirror. But somewhere beneath that beauty, something was already stirring. The first signs came in the form of strange lights, flickering like the ghost of a dying flame. Some say they saw them dancing across the water, like spirits trying to warn them. Then came the sounds muffled, distant, like the whisper of a voice calling from the deep. Some claimed they heard it in their dreams, others in the stillness of the night. The crew tried to dismiss it as the sea's way of being, but there was something about the way the lights danced and the sounds echoed that made even the most seasoned sailors uneasy. And then, just as the first signs began to take shape, the sea itself seemed to shift, as if something ancient and vast had stirred beneath the waves. You see it now, the great ship, the Titanic cutting through the dark Atlantic, a glowing white light against the endless black. The world was watching, but the sea was not, and the icebergs, they were coming. Then came the first crack, a sound like a distant thunderclap, but no storm was coming. The crew tried to stay calm, but the ice was already in the water, and the ship was already too far from help. The water poured in, slow and steady, like a cruel joke. The passengers were told to stay calm, but the cold was already in their bones, and the ocean was already in their lungs. The lifeboats were not enough. The crew worked like madmen, but the cold was faster. And when the Titanic sank, it took with it a dream, a legacy, and the lives of those who had believed in the impossible. And so, the Titanic became more than a ship. It became a story of hubris, of fate, of the sea's cruel indifference. And now you're still here, listening. Are you ready to hear what came next? I remember the day I read about the Titanic's final moments and the way the ocean swallowed it whole. You ever feel like time folds in on itself when you hear a story like that? Some say the ship was too proud, too confident in its own invincibility. But the ocean doesn't care about your reputation. It just wants to swallow you whole. One survivor said the water was like a mirror, reflecting the stars. But then the cold came, and the mirror shattered. You ever feel like you're being watched by the sea? Some say the Titanic doesn't just haunt the water, it haunts the memories of those who lived it. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the echo of its final whistle. The investigation into the Titanic wasn't just about the wreck itself. It was about the people who had been lost, the families who had waited, and the strange things that kept turning up in the wreckage like a pocket watch that never stopped ticking. They found personal items in the debris, letters, jewelry, even a child's toy. But what caught the attention of the experts was something odd, a man's wedding ring, found near the captain's quarters, with no name inside. Some said it was just the natural movement of the ocean, but others whispered that the Titanic wasn't just a ship. It was a memory, and it was still trying to be heard. The investigation never really ended. Every year, something new turned up. A name, a story, a hint that the Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a ghost, and it was still waiting to be found. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot 5 smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, even in the depths of the Atlantic, there are things that have never been explained. One detail, in particular, has lingered like a whisper in the dark, unanswerable and unsettling. It's the one thing that no one seems to have a clear answer for, the exact moment the ship stopped responding to the helm. Did it freeze, or was it already too late to steer? You ever wonder if the ship was trying to avoid something, or if it was already too far gone to turn back? The truth is still out there, buried beneath the ice and time. And that, dear listener, is the one thing that has never been explained. Just one small detail, but one that haunts the memory of the Titanic like a ghost in the fog. You've heard the stories about the iceberg, but what about the ones that say the ship was cursed before it even left port? Some say the captain was a man with a dark past, a man who knew too much. Others whisper that the ship was built on sacred ground, and that the workers who built it were paid in blood. You can still find those old blueprints in the local archives with strange symbols etched in the corners. There's also the theory that the Titanic wasn't just hit by an iceberg, but that it was lured by something deeper, something that still calls to it from the ocean floor. And then there are the locals who say the ship never really sank at all, just disappeared, and that its ghost still sails the Atlantic, waiting for the right moment to return. So, what do you think? Was the Titanic just a tragic accident? Or is there something more to the story? I'll tell you this, every time the wind howls on the water, it sounds a little like the Titanic calling home. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't about ghosts, but about the questions that never get answered. What if the Titanic's final moments are still whispering secrets to the deep? We've pieced together so much, yet there are still pieces missing, like the final seconds of those in the water, or the fate of the ship's last surviving crew member. Did they drown, or did they somehow escape? And what about the unseen survivors? The ones who vanished without a trace, their names never recorded, their stories never told. Are they still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found? The Titanic's story is far from over. It lingers in the silence of the deep, in the questions we still ask, and in the way the ocean remembers those who were lost. What do you think it's trying to tell us? You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones that end in tragedy, but the ones that linger in silence between the lines. It's not the iceberg that haunts us, but the echoes of the lives that were lost, each one a story, each one a soul that never made it to shore. And so, as we turn the page, let's not forget some stories are not meant to be told, but to be felt. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear the wind carrying a whisper from the deep. Shall we go find out where it's coming from? You've heard of the old whalers, the ones who chased the sea for fortune, but the Hesperus, that ship was cursed before it ever left port. They said the sea itself wanted her to sink. The Hesperus was built in 1822 in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a town that knew how to make money from the sea. But the ship had a ghost in her sails, or so the sailors claimed. Now, the Hesperus rests in the deep, but the tales don't end there. Fishermen say they've seen her ghost at night, a black shape cutting through the waves with no sails, no oars, just a voice calling out. Some say the ship was cursed by the sea itself. Others believe the crew was haunted by their own greed. But one thing's certain: no one who has tried to find the Hesperus has ever returned. So, what do you think? Was it the sea, or something worse? Or maybe the Hesperus is still out there, waiting for the next fool to chase her down. The Hesperus wasn't just a ship, it was a fortress of greed. Built in 1841 in the shipyards of New Bedford, it was designed for the brutal whaling trade, and it was one of the most feared ships on the high seas. Its captain, Elias Varnum, was a man with a reputation for cruelty and a hunger for profit. He wasn't just a whaler, he was a man who would do anything to get oil, even if it meant pushing his crew to the edge. The ship's first voyage was marked by disaster. A storm nearly destroyed them, and when they finally reached the whale grounds, the crew began to question whether they were chasing profit or their own doom. By the time they returned to port, the Hesperus was a ghost of its former self. The crew was broken, and the ship's reputation was sealed. But the true horror was yet to come. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right. The crew of the Hesperus was fine one moment, and then the next, the air just changed. It wasn't the wind, it was something else. Something inside the ship. They started acting strange, muttering to themselves, staring at the sea as if they saw something no one else could. The captain said it was the sea's way of testing them, but you could tell he was worried. Then came the smell. Not the sea, not the wood, but something else, something sweet and sharp, like burnt sugar and decay. It clung to your clothes, your skin, and you couldn't get it out. You tried to tell the others, but they laughed it off. Just a bad trip, they said. But deep down, you knew something was watching. Something was waiting, and it wasn't going to let them go. You remember the first time you heard of the Hesperus, don't you? That quiet little town on a coast, where the sea whispers secrets and the wind carries the scent of salt and sorrow. It was the summer of '32, and the crew had sailed out for just a few days. The captain said it was a good catch, a good season, and that they'd be home by nightfall. The town tried to move on, but the sea never lets go. You can still hear the creak of her timbers in the wind, and the waves whisper her name in a language only the lost understand. And now, every year on the anniversary of that fateful day, the townsfolk gather by this shore, lighting candles and saying prayers for the souls who never made it home. But some say the sea has a way of keeping its own, and that the Hesperus still waits, her crew never truly gone, just lost to the deep in the stories we tell. I met a fisherman who claimed he saw the Hesperus in a storm, just a flicker of light on the water. He said it looked like a ship, but it wasn't there. He said it was the ghost of a ship, and that it was waiting for someone. Another sailor told me about a time he heard the ship's bell ring in the middle of the night. He said it was so loud, it woke up the whole crew. But when he went to check, there was nothing. Just silence and a cold wind. One old man, who lived near the shore, said he saw the ship's figurehead in his window one night. It was carved out of dark wood, with eyes that seemed to follow him. He said it was the ship's soul, searching for the one who wronged it. A local historian told me about a ghostly ship that appeared in old sailors' logs, always in the same place, always at the same time. She said the stories are too similar to be coincidence, that the ship is real, and it's still out there. These stories are just tales, they're warnings, and I can't help but wonder what if the Hesperus is still out there, waiting for the next soul to cross its path. We dug deeper into the Hesperus' last voyage, chasing every log, every name, every whisper of where the ship might have gone. You've heard the stories, but what about the people who lived them? The crew wasn't just sailors, they were families, neighbors, and friends, all bound by the sea and the promise of fortune. But the more we uncovered, the more we realized they were tied to something far darker than the ocean. We found records of strange occurrences before the Hesperus vanished, a ship with no captain, a crew that disappeared in the night, and a harbor that refused to let the ship in. It was as if the sea itself had a will of its own. The deeper we went, the more we felt the weight of history pressing down on us. The sea had a memory, and the Hesperus was just one of many ships that had been lost to its secrets. And then there was the final clue, a name repeated in every log, every diary, every testimony. A name that had never been recorded. A name that belonged to someone who had never been seen again. We had no answers, only questions that grew colder with every passing day. The Hesperus wasn't just lost, it had been forgotten, and maybe that's why it still waits for us. You know, there's one thing about the Hesperus asterisk that's always bugged me. No one can explain why the ship never showed up after that last voyage. It's like the sea swallowed it whole, and no one remembers what it looked like. The crew was last seen heading into the Roanoke Trough, that place where the water gets so cold it chills your bones even if you're not in it. No distress call, no wreckage, just silence. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say the ship was cursed by the sea itself, that it was built on a moonless night and never saw the light of day again. Others say the captain made a deal with something older than the sea. But here's the thing, no one ever saw the ship's figurehead. Some say it was a whale, others say it was a woman, and no one knows what it looked like. Just that it was there, and then it wasn't. You can ask the locals, they'll tell you stories. But ask them what the figurehead looked like, and they'll just shrug and say, it was never meant to be seen. You've heard the stories, but the locals? They tell a different tale. Some say the Hesperus was cursed by a sailor's betrayal. Others swear the ghost of its captain still sails the fog, hunting those who dare to speak his name. There's even a theory that the ship was built on a sacred site, a place where the earth itself wept salt water. Some say it's why the sea never forgets it, why the wind howls like a mournful wail when the moon is full. And then there's the whisper that the Hesperus never truly went down, it just faded. Some say it's still out there, waiting for the right storm, the right sailor, the right mistake. So, what do you think? Is it a ghost, a curse, or just the sea's way of remembering? The truth, like the Hesperus, may be lost, but the stories, they'll never sink. There's still no one who can say for sure what happened to the Hesperus asterisk, and that's what makes it so haunting. No body, no wreckage, just whispers and the sea's cruel silence. You see, the mystery isn't just about the ship, it's about the people who vanished with her. What happened to the crew? Did they die, or did they simply disappear? Some say the sea remembers. Others say the Hesperus asterisk never really left, that she's still out there, waiting for the right moment to return, and the right person to finally answer the question that's been unanswered for generations. And so, the story lingers, not as a tale of horror, but as a question left in the wind, a riddle whispered by the waves, waiting for someone to finally solve it or to finally stop asking. You've followed the Hesperus through storms and silence, through centuries of salt and sorrow. But what if the real ghost isn't the ship, but the story we keep telling ourselves? Sometimes, the most terrifying thing is not what you see, but what you choose to believe is still out there waiting, watching, remembering. So, as you turn the page, remember, some stories are not meant to be closed. They're meant to be carried with you through time, through memory, through the quiet spaces between the lines. And now, as the night deepens, I'll leave you with the sound of waves and the feeling that somewhere the Hesperus is still out there. You've heard the whispers of the halls of justice, haven't you? A place where justice was once served with a hammer and a noose, now echoing with the weight of unsolved tragedies. The building itself is a relic, a faded monument to a time when the law was both a shield and a weapon. You can almost hear the whispers of the past, lingering in the dust and the silence. Some say the air here is heavy with regret, and the wind carries the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing through the empty halls like a ghost trying to be heard. And though the doors are locked and the building is abandoned, you can still feel the presence of those who were never truly let go, trapped between the past and the present, waiting to be remembered. You ever wonder how a place becomes a legend? Well, the Halls of Justice didn't start as a haunted house. It began as a place where justice was supposed to be served with brick and mortar and a whole lot of hope. The first judge, Elias Whitlock, was a man of quiet intensity, with a reputation for being both fair and fearsome. He sat in that courtroom, his hands steady, his voice a quiet thunder. But justice, you see, isn't always fair. And when the scales of the law began to tip, the halls of justice became more than a courtroom. It became a place where fear took root and whispers grew louder than the law. The legacy of the halls of justice isn't just in the cases they tried, It's in the ghosts of those who fought, lost, and were forgotten. And that's where the real story begins. You remember the way the air felt that first night, thick and heavy, like the house was holding its breath. It was almost peaceful until the smell of burnt sugar and old wood crept in like a whisper. Then came the sound like a child's laughter, but it wasn't quite right. It echoed, but not in the way you'd expect. It was as if the walls themselves were laughing at you. We tried to shrug it off, like we always do when something feels just a little off. But the house had a way of making you remember things you'd forgotten, like the last time someone walked these halls, or the last time someone left. And then came the cold, not just the chill of the old building, but a cold that crept in through the cracks of your bones. You could feel it watching, waiting for you to remember what you'd been told not to. You start to wonder, not if you're being haunted, but if you've ever really been alone. The house doesn't just remember, it waits. And it's waiting for you to remember too. You ever wonder what happens when the scales of justice tip too far? In 1948, a young woman named Leila Whitmore walked into the halls of justice with a heart full of hope and left with nothing but a fading smile. She was accused of a crime she didn't commit, but the system moved too fast and the truth was buried under the weight of a jury's verdict. And so, Leila vanished into the silence of the halls, leaving behind only whispers of a wrong that never saw the light of day. To this day, the halls echo with the sound of her footsteps, but no one can say where she went or if she ever truly left at all. You might say, but what does it mean? Well, sometimes the law doesn't just punish, it imprisons the soul, and Leila's ghost is still waiting for her story to be told. And if you hear her footsteps when the courthouse is empty, don't be surprised. That's just the system, trying to make amends for the wrongs it once ignored. I once spoke to a woman who swore she saw a shadow move in the hallway at midnight, just before the judge's portrait blinked once, then vanished. She said it looked like a man in a long coat, standing at the foot of the judge's chair. Another man claimed he heard a voice whispering his name in the courtroom, only to find no one else was there. He said the sound came from the jury box where the judge once sat, and it felt like someone was watching him from across the room. One of the most unsettling accounts came from a retired lawyer who said he saw a figure in the judge's office late one night. It was a man in a judge's robe, standing at the window, staring out into the dark with an expression of deep sorrow. And then there's the woman who said she saw a child's doll sitting in the courtroom, right where the judge's seat had once been. She said it was just for a moment, and then it was gone, like it had never been there at all. We followed the trail of whispers through the dusty archives, where time seemed to slow and the air felt thick with secrets. Every page turned seemed to echo with the weight of a forgotten past. The records were sparse, but they hinted at something deeper, a pattern of disappearances and strange occurrences that didn't quite fit the official story. One file in particular caught our eye, a name that didn't belong. It was there, in the margins, scrawled in a hurried hand like a note left behind by someone who never made it out. We started to notice the same name appearing in different places, like a thread pulled through a tapestry somehow woven into the very fabric of the halls of justice. There was something about that name that felt like a door opening just a crack, revealing a room we weren't supposed to see, and we were only beginning to understand what lay beyond it. You've heard the stories about the halls, the whispers, the slamming doors, but there's one thing no one can explain. What exactly does the ghost look like? No one ever saw it, but they all say they feel it. Some say it's a judge, others a prisoner, but no one can agree. It's always there, though just out of reach, like a memory you can't quite grasp. You can feel its presence, but not its face. The only thing they all agree on is that it's never been photographed. Not once. They've tried, but the moment the camera clicks, it vanishes. Like it's waiting for something or someone specific. And that's the real mystery, isn't it? Not the ghost, but the reason it won't show itself. Why does it hide? What does it want? You can feel it watching you, just like the others before you. They say the halls are haunted, but maybe they're just waiting for the right question to be asked, and the right person to ask it. Some say the whispers in the halls aren't just echoes of the past, they're messages from the ones who never left. Did they get trapped in the walls, or did they choose to stay? Neighbors used to tell stories about the judge's wife, who vanished on the night of the fire. Some say she was taken by the same force that claimed the others. Others say she never left at all. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. There's a theory that the building itself is a prison for the souls of those who were wronged. Some say the judges, the lawyers, the jurors, they're all trapped in their own guilt. But then again, some say the real curse isn't the ghost, it's the past that refuses to stay buried. And the longer we look, the more we realize we've been living in it all along. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. and tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching.